Second meeting of the Finance Committee to order. I am going to take a roll call because Lois, I think, is online and I think we've got to do that. So Suresh Bhatia is not present. Peggy Brace. Present. Kathy. Eric Dahlberg.
Present.
John.
Here.
Greg is going to be late. Amrith is not coming. Don. Lindsay.
Here.
Here. Here. Solomon.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Ozzy.
Here.
Lois.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. Let's get started. First order of business is public comment. Do we have anybody that wishes to make public comment? We do not. All right. Annual town meeting. Carmen is here to give us a
Sit up here.
debrief of the annual town meeting. So Carmen, come on up here and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm pleased to be here and thank you so much for your indulgence in my failure to show up the last time I was scheduled to be here. And as I think some of you know, the problem was that I got stuck on a delayed ferry and was out of any kind of connectivity. So I could not log into your meeting, but anyway, nor could I tell anybody that that's what happened. So, so there you go. Annual town meeting, we had an exit survey. I'll tell you a little bit. We didn't have a very big response to the exit survey, maybe about 50 people. And I just checked to see if we had any more responses come back in, and we really did not. I was just going to look to see if I could tell you a little bit about the survey itself. Of particular interest to the Finance Committee, I think one of the questions that we asked was whether or not people would be interested in receiving the Finance Committee report by a postcard with a QR code on it rather than a printed item. And slightly more than 50% of the respondents, but it's a small sample. It's, you know, it's 50 people, but slightly more than 50% said they'd rather have a QR code. But almost half said they'd rather have the actual book. I know you've already had some discussion about whether you could make a change there, and you know that you would need to make a bylaw change in order to do that. And one thing that I would suggest to you, though, is that what made the Finance Committee report particularly costly to print this year was doing it in color. And I know that you prefer to have color to be able to see all of the graphs and so forth, but it would be substantially less expensive to print it in black and white and put a QR code in the book for people to go see the color charts online if they want to see them in color. So that's just a thought for you. I think that we also had one motion that was made during the, one motion that was made during discussion of the town budget, seeking to push it until after the Concord Public Schools budget, because people wanted to be looking at those budgets holistically. And so it is an interesting question whether, and I know Amrith has done some thinking about this, but it is an interesting question whether it would be possible to reconfigure how those budgets are considered at town meetings so that they could be considered as a group and voted on after everyone looks at all of them. And that would be something that would need to be vetted with the town manager and the select board and the finance committee and the schools to think about exactly what that would look like. It would be changing a very, very long-standing tradition in terms of how we do it. But just the fact that we've always done something one way doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way we should continue doing it. And I'm sympathetic to the concern raised by the citizen that, well, I really want to understand how this all goes together. And that is, of course, how this committee thinks about the budgets. You do think about them all together. And all of the guidelines that you issue are with an eye toward the collective operating budget as a whole for all three units, as well as the collective capital budgets. But that isn't the way they are presented and voted on at town meetings. So it's a topic that's worthy of further conversation, and it might take longer than it might take longer to develop it than would be so long enough to develop that it wouldn't be possible to implement it for this annual town meeting cycle, but it might be a conversation you wish to think about. One thing that happened during the meeting, which was a good thing, was that the CPA, the CPC and the Finance Committee sorted out differences over a particular article, and the Finance Committee changed its recommendation on the article, and that made things a little more streamlined for town meeting in considering it. However, it was noted by a few people that the Finance Committee, in an entirely polite effort not to disrupt the meeting by having a conversation during the meeting, took themselves out to the hallway in the back of the gymnasium, which is not a very public place, when you were in fact convened in an open, in a publicly posted open meeting. And it is, you're posted during town meeting, and it is true that if you all stick your heads together and have a conversation at the table, most of the public isn't really aware of what's happening. Now, they could, if they wanted to, they know that you're having an open meeting and they can come and hover if they want to.
You did leave the door open. I understand.
Yes, I understand, but
We were a little loud.
but
You were shouting.
yeah, so, but I think it would probably be better if you went the other way. If you went, if you had to do that and you wanted to step out of the gymnasium, if you went to the cafeteria instead and had the conversation there, it's so much more public and you would still be visible. Everyone would know where you were, and no one could have a perception that you were hiding from anyone. Which I know you were not. So I was particularly pleased to see such a strong turnout from the Finance Committee all the way through town meeting in terms of your presence there. That was a great thing. And the level of commitment that the committee has shown in this past year is just to be commended, and I thank you all for that. So that's kind of it from me. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments that you would like to share about town meeting.
So I'll just add a couple of thoughts and then others can chime in, but I think the notion of some sort of way to globally look at our spending is something that we've considered last year, and I think we're going to continue considering it. We may or may not see changes in how we present material, both in the annual report, but as we talked about the last meeting, and we'll discuss today, throughout the course of the year to better educate folks. And I think depending on what else is on our work plan, which we're also going to discuss today, this notion of, do you vote on a global budget and then parse it out? There are lots of potential different ways to do something I think is intriguing and something we ought to consider. Because otherwise it's hard to figure out what the trade-offs are that people are actually voting on. So I think it's a good comment from folks, and appreciate the fact that we snuck off, tried to strike that, didn't strike. We got up and
You
went
did
to
not.
another place.
You
Everybody
did not sneak.
saw
I
that we
understand.
left.
Yes.
So we'll go out in the cafeteria if we have to do that
Yeah.
again. So thank
Okay.
you for the
That
feedback.
would be great.
Anything else? And appreciate the support for what we did last year. So thank you.
Yeah. And it wasn't an easy year. But y'all did your job, which is what you should be doing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for the feedback from the meeting. It's good to hear, especially the comments on the cards. I'd like to get your opinion on a visual that whether or not it'd be appropriate at a town meeting. One notion we've had is we have an idea of what we can afford to spend. And if we added up everything that's to be voted on, where does that fall relative to that line of what the town can afford? We have our budgets, we have the 3 budgets, and we also have other expenditures to be approved. And if we had a visual that showed that we could approve all of these budgets and still be below the line, then that would be informative. And if we had one that showed, well, if we approve everything that's proposed, we're going to exceed the line by X dollars, that I think would be a quick way for people to calibrate their voting. Do you think that thinking like a thermometer kind of a thing, would that be inappropriate for the finance committee to do?
Oh, I don't think it's inappropriate. You have the you do presentations really very much like that in the finance committee report. So and Lois's presentation that she did for the finance committee at the beginning of the meeting was not dissimilar to that. So I wouldn't see a problem with that. And by the way, that is one thing that I didn't address. That was a break with tradition to have the finance committee do an oral report. Typically, nothing happens under Article 2, and it's addressed on the consent calendar. But it did seem to me that it was totally appropriate this year because there was a lot of controversy back and forth, and the finance committee was seeing some trends that were worthy of bringing to the attention of town meeting for you to do that. We certainly can revisit that again next year and consider whether there is more new information or whether it's important to continue to follow where the issues that you identified are moving.
I think my initial blush is to have a spot at the beginning to give that overall impact somehow, regardless of whether there's underlying controversies or not. Because that way everybody can be clear of what's going on. And then in future years, if there are, it doesn't seem out of the ordinary, right? It's not a
Right.
special occasion. So perhaps at some point you weave in something like that. But I think it's helpful to set the context.
To clarify a little further, I was thinking of a live tracker of something where we say, well, these measures have been approved, so this is where we stand.
Well, that's kind of an interesting spin on the question of dealing with all the expenditure articles as a group in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
To me, from a big picture, we're looking at a town that's committed to spend over $100 million. And the outlier was $500,000. So rather than pinning it to various categories, I'd like to find a way to make it an overall issue. What don't you want in order to be within budget? Because it's clear, the message is clear that schools are not the thing to be talking about. At least that's the message I got.
Right. Well, I will say one interesting thing that came up, and I think Parashar, you were on this chain, right? Right after town meeting, that there was a parent who has a blind child who had been working really hard all over the place, disability committee, public works and so forth. You know, can I get a crosswalk in front of my house because my blind kid has got to cross the street to get the bus and has almost gotten picked off a couple times now. And Public Works knew all about this and explained that, well, we haven't had any money in the line item for a pedestrian and sidewalk improvements for the last 2 or 3 budget cycles. So there is no money to do something like this. And it turned out to be a problem that could be solved, I think, because the student was being picked up by the bus used to come up on the same side of the street as the student's house. And but now there was a new bus driver and the bus driver was coming on the other side. So it seemed like, well, talk to the school and see if you can get that fixed. And so we had I think it was Minuteman. And so we had the Minuteman school committee person involved and so forth. And it was a particularly interesting email because it was sent to me, Chris Whalen, and Laurel Landry, who is no longer with us. So anyway, but it found its way to the proper channels. But that's a trade-off that is being made that I'm not sure people are aware is being made, and whether they would actively choose that trade-off if they understood that that's what they were doing. So the question is a good one. How do you present all the choices? Right now, we present the choices within budget units, but we don't present them across budget units and think about them in that way.
How do you mean across budget units?
Schools
Like
versus regional schools versus town. So within the
At that
town,
level?
yeah. So within the town budget, we know if Public Works is being traded off against the police department, or
Right.
like we know that that's happening, but we don't know that if we say that our spending cap is here,
Mhm.
and one of the 3 budget units needs to come up, so the others need to come down. What are they cutting out
Mhm.
in order for that one to come up? We don't really know. And how would it work if we were balancing those against each other?
Right.
You just made a statement that we know within the town, the various trade-offs. Do the townspeople know that? I mean, I just see that I don't think, no, I don't, I think it's just, that all they know is there's no question.
So the townspeople would know if they followed the whole budget process, because if they followed the whole budget process, they would hear the town manager's presentation to the select board on here's what our priorities are. They might know they might know from the town meeting preview meeting that there's certain budget drivers this year.
In our process also, over the last couple of years, we've asked all of the groups to come in and tell us what your strategic priorities are and what you're leaving off.
Right.
So if they follow it, they should know that
Right.
we're able to fund this and this, and then said we did that. So,
Right. 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 And actually, the town manager in her budget presentation at town meeting this year
Yes.
did make clear, we need to do a lot of things. These are the things that I've focused on. And these are the things we're not, and especially because she had $500,000 that she had to pull out of the budget somewhere. And so she explained where that was going.
So let's go around. Let's just see if other folks have questions, and then we'll go around.
Yeah.
So any other questions or comments before we let Carmen take her leave? More than welcome to stay.
What suggestions?
Into the mic, we need the microphone because
Carmen, what suggestions are you considering for next year in terms of changes, streamlining, expanding the meeting?
Hmm. So the two things that I think will be in front of the select board to think about, and they aren't my decision, they'll be the select boards. One is whether we stick with Sunday or whether we go back to Monday night. And we did, we adopted Sunday. It was a recommendation of the town meeting study report in the 90s that said to make it more accessible and easier for people, we should do it in the daytime. We should try a Sunday afternoon. But the very people who that was designed to make, whose schedules we were trying to address to enable them to come to town meeting, those are the people, parents of school-aged children and so forth, who said, this is awful. We can't get where I got 4 little league games, or whatever it is. And they did not like it. So they would rather that we go back to Monday nights. And I asked that question at a chair's breakfast of all the people in the room. We had a good crowd that morning. And it was about evenly divided between I prefer Sunday or I prefer Monday. So it'll be up to the select board's call what to do. But the select board will address the calendar for next year's town meeting on Monday night. And I know Parashard made the suggestion that we change up the content of the public hearings that the finance committee holds, so that we do take all the budget unit operating budgets on the same night. And it'll make for a long night for you guys, but they'll all be on the same night, and that does contribute to that holistic thing. So that'll be on this schedule. And then the only other thing that's on there is what to do with that town meeting preview meeting. That's the one that happens in December when the warrant opens, and I think many people feel like that meeting's a waste of time. And historically, what that meeting was really for, the Carlisle people used to come, and there'd be kind of a 2-town summit so that the Carlisle people could understand what the drivers were going to be in Concord. And we could hear from the Carlisle people a little bit about what the drivers were going to be in Carlisle, because we're very intertwined when we're dealing with the regional school budget. And so it made a certain amount of sense to know more broadly what was going on in each town in terms of drivers for the budgets. But that hasn't happened for a long time. And at that meeting, the other thing that would happen is, our budget units would kind of lay out, okay, like here's the things that are going to be a real problem this year. We got 100 more kids in this age group, or the fire station burned down and we got to build a new, whatever it is that you would hear about what
I would hope that wouldn't happen.
no, indeed. Yeah. But, you would hear about those things. And then the finance committee would give a presentation about drivers and revenue, state aid and stuff like that, so that we all kind of had like okay, here's the climate that we're going into in this town meeting cycle.
Maybe that
to
should be in
understand the
September
budgets.
versus December when the budgets are done. I'm just throwing it out there,
Interesting.
but
Yeah. So that if you were going to have, and the other question is this thing happening, which didn't used to happen, do you still need this town meeting? I don't know. The capital planning doesn't address the operating budgets, but maybe you're right. Maybe there should be a parallel operating budget series of meetings, and maybe the town preview meeting should, it's been suggested by some that it should instead be a town meeting primer to let everybody know, here's all the deadlines, here's how it works. Here's the ways that people screw up, please don't. And to kind of just use that opportunity for a little primer. But
Last question, and then we're gonna get going.
One last question, which is consent agenda. It was quite lengthy this year. And there are probably some upcoming money issues that really more people need to know about. That are on the, but that generally end up on the consent agenda. So I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on the number of articles that you want on the consent agenda, or ones that, because some of the conversations could be lengthy if you talked about the water treatment plant, or you talked about PFAS, right? And I'm just wondering, how can we address that if we have a very large consent agenda?
So I don't I have no preconceived notions about the consent agenda. Those decisions get made once we're done with all the hearings and we see what the issues look like, what's the level of controversy, are the routine ones still really routine, or is there something really different about them this year so that really we ought to talk about them? So that's really all I can say about that. We did, or I did adopt a practice really at the urging of the League of Women Voters a few years back of among the enterprise funds, picking one of them, don't put them all on the, but to kind of rotate which one of them would come off, because, the presentations that get made at the hearings on the enterprise funds are great, and you learn all kinds of things you didn't know about paving programs and wastewater and trash and, so on. It is a shame for people not to see those at town meeting, but imagine how much longer town meeting would be if we did them all at town meeting. So instead, the kind of compromise position is let's take a different one of them each year. And for a while, we were kind of also pulling the Beatty Center off because it looked like, the Beatty Center was, not doing too well. But the Beatty Center seems to be on a good trajectory now. So I don't think we need to be addressing that one necessarily. But at the time, the consent calendar, I always bring it to the select board for a conversation. And that's kind of the point at which, if there are people on the finance committee who have a point of view about that, or if the finance committee as a committee has a point of view, by all means, let me know. I'm happy to send you the draft consent calendar so that you two can give me input on it.
Sure.
And that would be fine.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
All
you
right.
all.
Thank you, Carmen. Appreciate it. We will be in touch through the rest of the year, I'm sure.
Indeed. I will hang around for a little while.
Great.
Oh, and is that me? That is me right there.
So the next item is update on follow-up items. Gail, were you gonna just go through the follow-up items that we had from last meeting?
Sure.
Kind of the status? Thank you. Into the microphone so that folks.
The first was to send an updated list of the liaisons. Once they were agreed upon, that has been done and the website has been updated, as is the information in the packet. There's follow-up with the Concord Bridge, which is an outstanding item depending on the outreach work group. The work group, which was D, Lois, and Parsha, and Eric was part of that, did meet, so there'll be an update on that. We inviting the committee, various liaisons, the select board, school committees, and Kerry to the various meetings, so I'm not going to apologize for the number of invites that got sent out over the last couple of days to all of the liaisons, so they are now on all the invites you guys received. I have now added the liaisons to those, so each time there's an update, they will get those. And then one that was just discussed was contacting the moderator to talk about the hearing schedules, which was also done.
Great, thank you. And you'll notice these are new items at the end of the meeting. We'll make sure we've basically aligned on the follow-up items also. So hopefully we'll keep us on track.
Is there a page, Gail, is there a page of the follow-up items in the packet?
There is not. It's an Excel spreadsheet. If we want to make it available, happy to circulate it, but it's just an Excel spreadsheet with those items. And so we can,
Just
You want to circulate it? We'll
If you
circulate it.
wouldn't mind putting it as part of the
Yeah, we had
package.
Go ahead and do
discussed it, that obviously.
I picked the wrong option.
Decision was. The head
I'm
was
just
there.
used to.
That's
checking
good.
from the
No, that's
agenda
fine.
to-
So we'll go ahead and circulate it. We'll add it. Update from the chair's breakfast. So let me start and then open it up for questions. So I will start it the way Henry did. We received a 340B application from a developer for potentially developing 200 apartments off of Baker Avenue extension, basically. 50 of those would be affordable housing. It came in a few days ago. It is now public. Of course, this only kicks off a long process for the planning board, a bunch of other committees, including us. I think one of the things, of course, is the fiscal impact to the town. 200 apartments is quite a bit. There's no age restrictions, et cetera. And so we would expect, I think they're 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments also. So we would probably expect to see some families come in also. Impact on schools and other services, et cetera. So that's all the information I have right now. And obviously, as we learn more, we'll be interacting quite a bit. I'm looking at Lindsay and Eric. You guys are the liaisons for the planning board. Keep this one on the top of our list also, just because we'll have to figure out potential impact as we think about both revenue, which is good because you increase the revenue, but then also potential costs as well. So, okay. So that was the biggest item. Let me just go through this other list. Oh, by the way, they're asking, the only thing they're asking for is, I guess, a waiver of the sewer improvement fees. We'll see if that's the only thing or whether that's their opening gambit. So more to follow there.
Sorry, is it going to the sewer system?
No, into the microphone, sorry.
Is it going to the sewer system or are they doing septic? Most of those buildings have septic.
I'm just reading what was
Okay.
told, what I was told. I have no idea. This
Okay.
was not this was just stated. So I have no additional details. Transportation Advisory Committee. So we just talked about trade-offs. Look for Public Works to come looking for additional money over the next couple of years to make up for the shortfall that they've had over the last couple of years also. Both for that as well as potentially more money for multimodal transportation improvements around town. So that, again, something to keep our eye on. Let's see here. Middle school athletic CPC has met with the middle school building committee because they want CPC money for the athletic fields. So I'm looking at Chris and Suresh is not here, but just FYI on that. I think the 250th anniversary folks also came in and asked for started the conversation about starting a process to access CPC money. The Economic Vitality Committee is working on a couple initiatives. One is the impact of the sewer improvement fee on small businesses. They're doing a bit of a survey to see what type of barrier that poses. They're also developing a database, I think, of all small businesses in Concord. There may not be one. Gail, you're on the committee, right? Is that what the database is? Do you remember? Economic Vitality Committee, are you on that committee? Okay. Quasi, you are. And then the third one is food truck implementation. So they're giving advice to the planning board around regulations, bylaws around food truck.
When are those starting?
They already started apparently, right? They had one at the Juneteenth celebration. They had a couple.
Oh,
So
okay.
Municipal Housing Authority, this is an interesting one. They were up on Beacon Hill lobbying for a real estate surtax for affordable housing. And so I've made a little note to Kathy. Can we follow up with the housing folks here, the liaison, and maybe try to get a sense of what percentage surtax? Because I think if they are lobbying for that, it's something we ought to consider as we try to take a look at the overall dollar amounts coming out of taxpayer pockets. Sort of keep that in the back of our mind.
Yeah, so that you go ahead.
The lobbying, excuse me,
Into the microphone, please. I know, I'm sorry. We got
it's
people,
the only plug that.
I know, but we got people online.
Lobbying at the State House would be across the state.
Yes, for authority to do that. Apparently
Right.
you need state authority for municipalities to impose surtax like that.
Who's on affordable housing? Who's
I just
Yeah, so if you go.
I just switched over and
Yeah,
I'm trying to
that's
get
okay.
onto their
Anyway, So
calendar.
so the town's already approved that a couple times actually, so, but they can't do it without the state. So that's part of what's going on. But if you go back, I can chat with you, Kathy. There's lots of
Mhm.
history you can read up on that. What is it? You want to know the rate?
What the maximum is, what the
Yeah.
minimum, I mean, just something to get a sense. Are we looking 0.5%
Yeah.
inflation coming out or a percent? So that's all.
They never actually set a rate. What the group here did is they came up with an amount. So I think they were looking at somewhere like 1 to 2 million a year they wanted to raise. So that's about where it was, but I'll
Yeah,
send you
we
the
need
stuff.
more-
So
we need-
the rate would be set based on the dollars that they're looking
Yes,
to.
I see. Yeah.
For sure. What bucket would that go into? That $1 million, would it go into just free cash? Not free cash.
No,
sorry,
I think it would
but-
go to the municipal
It was
housing.
Municipal
trust.
housing
Right.
authority,
Okay.
yeah.
So it's not like it's.
No, it's not free money. It's,
Revenue,
it's-
No. Well, it's revenue, it's the revenue dedicated to a purpose,
Correct. Thank you.
right?
it was, the intent was to stop taking money from. free
From
cash.
like the 500 out.
Yeah.
And they actually want more than they
Yep.
take it out, actually, is what they said.
Yeah.
So. Concord Housing Development Corporation, there apparently is a draft RFP they're working on for Junction Village,
Mhm.
family housing. Basically, the draft RFP is underway.
Hmm.
No sense of when it might be released or anything. at this
As a
point.
replacement project?
As a replacement.
And is this with the Walter?
Well, it's an RFP that's gonna go out, so it's unclear.
Oh, okay.
It's a draft RFP. Board of Assessors. You might know about this. There's no more detail and I didn't want to take up time. The Board of Assessors approved overlay funds for the middle school building committee. Is that for the stabilization fund? Okay, so that's something we were aware of. So that. got
That was
approved.
coming out of town meeting, so they had to wait until the abatement
Yep.
season was over to officially vote and release it. So that was more of a,
Okay.
But it's what we expected. It's
Yeah,
not.
no change.
And then on the planning board, Linda Miller, the chair, made an offer to all the committees if they want her to come in and talk about the MBTA Communities Act and the overlay. And do we want her to come in and talk about that is the question. I think it would be helpful.
Yeah,
to do
I
that.
think
There
it
are-
would be helpful.
So I want to make sure the rest of the committee feels that way.
Well,
I think so.
It's certainly something I want to follow, but that said, there are a lot of public meetings being held already,
Yep.
so we're all free to attend those if we don't want to spend additional time in.
There's one on the
This is
20.
why I'm asking. So there's the one coming up next week
Yeah.
on the 28th, where they're kicking it off.
Yeah.
So do we want to wait until after
Why don't
that
we
to
wait?
decide whether we?
And then
come
see
in?
if we want more.
Right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we'll wait and then if necessary, we can bring her in.
They did have one a week or so ago that was a Zoom meeting. They did have one that was a week or so ago as a Zoom meeting, and they had the person from the MBTA come in and say, this is how we're planning it. This is, here are all of the tools you're going to need. And there were various committees there from the select board, the planning department, the CPC was there. Probably community housing members from, or affordable housing divisions were there, or committees were there. And, so that was the first example of asking this community to outreach and having those other committees that were there, this community to get to outreach, but having the committees there who are going to be responsible for the outreach. So now you start seeing signs around town in front of the library, in front of, the circle. And so it is on its way. And maybe, you'd be interested in partaking in one of those meetings as well.
Right.
And listening.
Yep, there's a ton of them. Okay, so we'll wait until after the 28th before we decide whether we want to ask them to come in. So let's go to the next item, which is the liaison update. So one thing I will ask, if the liaisons have not reached out to their committees, the committee chairs, go ahead and do so. Because as you just heard, there's a lot that's happening around town. The planning board, I've been talking to Mary around the select board issues. I've talked to Alexa and Tracy around schools. So the rest of us should reach out proactively and just let folks know you guys are the new liaisons and start those conversations. So having said that, let me just go in order of the committees here and just get 3 to 5 minute readout, if anything. If nothing's happened, that's fine. So D, schools.
Schools. Okay, so there was a meeting a week or so ago with the school committee and this was from a money standpoint, one that we'd be interested in hearing about. And it was the paving of the access road. So they needed more money. The bids came in more than $900,000. And they needed to find $420 or so $1,000 in order to put the bid to award.
The region.
This is at the region, yes, the regional school. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail about it. They did take money. They did not use any money out of the E&D account to supplement. And they did transfer money that was it was a prepay for the tech support a prepay for next year for tech support. And they took that money instead to use to cover the costs. So, and I have talked with one of the members of the committee as well after the fact, but I just wanted to bring it up. And that is something that is ongoing. They have now awarded the contract and the for us, the way that they spend the money is their decision. We will be approaching this though at our capital planning sessions in July with the school committee for next year.
We got a letter, I got a letter yesterday from Tracy. Following our process that we set up this year, we'll include that correspondence in next month's package. I'll go ahead and circulate the letter ahead of time, but just FYI, and then next month, the school is going to be a joint meeting. So we'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about both capital planning and spending. And if we've got questions, we can talk about it then versus talking about it now. Okay.
So that was the big news.
Good. Thank you.
Yep.
Suresh is not here. Chris, anything from the middle school building committee?
No, they haven't met since we met
Okay,
last.
good. Don and Dee on Minuteman? Don?
I have nothing.
Okay. Lindsay, planning board?
We'll
Yeah.
have more month after.
Perfect. Peggy, CPC?
No.
Nope. Public Works?
Just briefly, I'm in touch with the new vice chair, Sven Weber. They met last week. I couldn't make it because it was during the business day, but we're going to catch up for coffee next week and just get a report out. They don't meet again until September, so they have kind of a summer break.
Good. Kathy, Concord Housing, Municipal Affordable Housing Trust and Housing Authority, anything from those?
I think you covered.
That's it. Okay. Fuzzy, Economic Vitality?
I reached out to the chair, Jennifer, so I'm on the distribution list. I missed the first meeting because I was traveling. And I encouraged her to do a Zoom, but it's in person only.
Okay. Carlin, Rec.
Yeah, the Recreation Commission did not meet on June 7th. They didn't have a quorum, so they postponed it to June 27th. That's coming up. I'll be going to that. They did give me an update on the BD Center. The BD Center pools, all refunds for the spring programs have been promised and have been delivered. That was part of the accommodation for those who had paid for access to the pools. They've done some follow-up testing. The testing on the wells came back well within the recommended indoor quality levels. The kiddie pool and the warm water pools were refilled. They were tested. And as we heard at the chair's breakfast on Wednesday, the health department said that those two pools could be opened up again. Now, the other two pools, the dive well and the lap pools are still being chemically balanced, and the Board of Health is going to be testing that pool fairly soon. That was the major update I have from the Rec Commission. I'll find out more about the BD Center as well as their strategic plan when I go to the meeting on the 27th.
Great. Thank you. Okay, no questions. So feel free to interrupt, by the way. So I want to make sure we keep moving. Finance Committee, Communication Task Force Committee update and discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to Dee. I'm going to share the presentation. Hopefully folks had a chance to look at the presentation ahead of time. Let me just pull this up here and kick it off, Dee. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you. We met twice. The first time was on a Friday and it was in June. And this month. And then the following Monday, the first meeting was from 2 until 3:45. And we had the room from 2 to 3:30, but and Eric had to leave right away. And so, we just chatted a bit longer. The members of the committee are Parashar, Lois, myself, and Eric. So it was a really interesting, and we could go to the next slide. The problems and the solutions. If you have read the information, if you have read the minutes from it, they were very brief, and the minutes were just a compilation of what our findings were, what our conclusions were on those 2 days. We spent a lot of time thinking about what's the problem here? Why aren't people hearing what we're saying? Are they hearing what we're saying? Do they understand what guidelines mean? How long did it take anybody in the room to understand what the guidelines process was? So these were the topics that we were talking about. And what we concluded is people don't know what we do for the most part. And so we need to inform them of what we do. So the initiative has to come from us. And our audience that we selected is every resident in the town. It's not a select group. We looked at a couple of different kinds of groups. Did we want to just target? No, it's all residents. So that was kind of as we started. So as you notice, the problem and the solution is we need to revise the way that we work with full transparency. And so you can go to the next slide. So our approach, we have 2 different aspects of it. A phased approach, which is to inform the residents of what we do. And that's a big picture starting in the August timeframe. And the second part is to communicate from September through October how the guidelines process works, the timeline of that, and the implications. Next slide, please. There's also a continuous approach. So the continuous approach is slightly different because it's our way of outreaching, not just informing, but to outreach, to get people, get committees, get boards to better understand what we're doing. So you will see that as we look at groups and organizations, it's going to be up to us to think, who are these groups and organizations that we want to outreach to? And the outreach methods, as they're listed there, we can use, we have a web page on the town website. We can update that anytime we want to. We have a good contact with the communications person for the town who's right across the hall. And so that's one way that we can do this. We can send out as emails are sent out to people who want alerts. We can do that as well. We can inform the town communications person about that. And then we can have, if we're holding a meeting and we think it's really an important meeting, that can be part of the alert that goes out that week to the people who are getting the alert messages. We have a vehicle with Concord Bridge as well as the Concord Journal. At our second meeting, which was held on Monday, Betsy Levinson was here, and there was actually a piece in the paper then that came out, which was really very nice. And follow that up. And this past week, there was also a retrospective on Lois Wassoff's presentation at town meeting, if you've had a chance to read that, which was really also pulled out the issues that we need to address as a town, as a community, not just as a town, but the towns, the schools, any other group involved in our community. Other forums, we could go to Council on Aging. We can go to any department if they are interested in that. So these are the ways that we can outreach, and the person who might be the contact to outreach might be maybe the observer for that committee. If it's the planning board that we want to outreach to. It might be the Observer, it might be Parashar who goes out, it might be somebody else who goes out. So all of these things will unfold as we get more involved in this work of communicating and outreaching. The next slide, please. So this, Parashar, I'm going to let you talk about this because this is your baby.
Well, I mean, this, I think, just graphically shows the concepts that Dee just outlined, right? So for example, if we think about fact sheets, for example, 1 to 2 pages about what we do, we discussed several of them. We could have one on how the operating budget basics, right? Just what the process is, what it looks like, a little bit of a roadmap to show folks what are the important key dates that are coming up in the next year that folks might want to keep an eye out on. Capital plan basics, again, very similar capital planning and spending in Concord 101, not 5 pages or 10 pages, but 1 or 2 pages. Some of these might be infographics, for example. So these are just ideas and concepts of where it doesn't have to be a one-time thing, but you could have a series of pieces of information that go out to folks that are interested, again, through the web, emails, letters to Concord Journal and others, et cetera. Concord Bridge, et cetera. So that's basically what this says. And then the meetings with community-based groups would occur through the course of the year, and it would be organic to a certain extent also, right? All of these would be. So that basically is just visualizes what the cadence that we could potentially undertake over the course of the year.
Okay, so we spent, our little task force spent a considerable amount of time just discussing what we wanted to do. What are the problems? Why are we even thinking about doing this? And so we can't ask you to have, all your questions right now or all your thoughts right now, but would love to hear if you have some thoughts right now on, do you think this is a valid approach to be taking? Do you think that people don't know about that people do know about the Finance Committee and how it works? So this is an opportunity just for a few minutes to just kind of collectively and individually talk about this whole idea of outreach and better
And to
communication.
be more specific, with the goal of making sure that we agree on action steps moving forward, because just having an academic conversation, good for some places, but we want to turn this into an action, right? So if folks agree with the basic concept, we'd love to hear that. And then if we want, we will have input on other items, et cetera, that we can take, that I think would be really good. So open up the floor.
Okay, so let's open that up and see if anybody has things they want to talk about tonight. Maybe their observations, their own observations of whether they think the citizenry is well informed from the standpoint of they're reading the materials that we provide. Maybe we don't know the answer to that, but how do you think about the use of the work that we do when we submit it to other people?
Well, let me actually go a little bit deeper.
Do you want to
The
go
basic concept,
deeper?
do we get the basic concept?
Yeah.
That we've
Yeah.
got to do a better job educating? Okay,
Yeah.
so we agree on that.
Everybody raise your hand if you agree.
And God, you've got something to say just in a couple. So do you like the concept of some of these short FAQs to go out at appropriate stages during our process to keep everybody informed?
Back
It would
to
be
that.
fact-based
Go back to
and
that.
not
slide.
opinion oriented. Is folks generally comfortable with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Because we're all going to be involved in the work, right?
Oh,
All of us.
don't tell them that now. No work involved.
Getting like a regular article in the Bridge.
It may not be regular because again, we don't want to make work for work's sake. But if there are key milestones along the way and we want to put out a page or a page and a half, like, so for example, one of the things we talked about is at our August meeting, we're going to have a guideline metric discussion and approval. Lindsay and Lois are going to come to us. Well, that's probably worthy of a page that says, hey, here's the options we considered as we think about guidelines, and here's why we're doing that, right? Just something like that. There may be a time when we don't put something out because there wasn't a big consequential discussion or decision. actually at one of our meetings. So I know Don wanted to say something and then I'll go to Kathy.
So 2 points. One would be, I'd argue for brevity in what we do. And secondly, I think I would like to propose that we consider a small insert that goes with the property tax bill. That would include the dates of upcoming hearings, the topics to be discussed. We could have a quarterly calendar of those meetings and 2 or 3 lines, and that's it. I mean, very, very brief, but make sure people are aware.
So we'd be on deadline for that.
Yeah.
As it goes out. Gail,
I need to look at that internally to see. I know we have outside people that do a lot of our printing, so it may or may not be feasible, so I would rather.
Okay.
Yeah,
not.
no,
Yeah.
well,
Commit
can we look
to-
into it? We're not committing,
Right.
right? So
Yeah,
these
I
are
have
just
to look
ideas
at
we're
what's
putting out.
involved
because the next
and
bill is due in August.
Yeah.
So
probably- And those are
it's pretty
already
close.
in.
I think we have much easier choices than with the property bill,
Yeah,
right? I mean, that's a very hard set in stone. If you're not in, you can't, as opposed to a webpage or something where you can
Well, and it-
change. And it's also more money, right?
Not a one only idea. It's
Correct.
one
True,
mechanism
true.
that
One
would
addition.
land in front of every property owner would see it.
yeah,
my-
one additional-
I'll be honest, I bet you some people don't, right? I know what my property bill looks like and comes in, and sometimes I open it, sometimes.
you just rip it up and toss it in the.
Yeah, I'm not taking care of it, no, I mean,
And you would.
yeah, it's sometimes people haven't go.
Into the microphone first, Greg. So that's one thing. So hold on. We had Kathy and then I saw Carlin and I would get to Carmen. So very quickly.
Common information for us. Well, I just wanted to know, I believe there's state law on what you can put in with property.
Okay, fair enough.
May not be written
Okay.
in the property
Yep.
tax bill, but you could do it with a utility bill.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that too. Okay.
Too.
Right, you rip those out too, right?
Yeah. Let's go rid of e-bill too, right?
And I
Wait, hold
I
on,
would
hold on.
just like to make sure we have we look at what is or isn't in, if somebody, I'm gonna say this jokingly, if somebody here wants to come and stuff envelopes, we would be happy to help.
These are just ideas, right?
No,
We're in
but
the
I-
ideas
or I just
stage, and
would
we don't
like the
toss anything out until we
opportunity to-
explore it a little bit further.
It's
So that's
also
good.
the Staffing.
Okay, Kathy and then Carlin, into the microphone, please.
I think the committee has done a marvelous job. I sat in as a public observer on one of the meetings that you had. I think it's difficult for us to anticipate, truly anticipate what people read and what people don't read. The particular item that was controversial this year as it relates to the schools. And, maybe the people on the committee here who are in the position of being parents of school-aged children can better inform us of how much people read what's going on. I mean, we send out thick books. I'll admit that, after the first couple of pages, you start to just look at headings. So my point is, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of good work. But will that reach the people who are most concerned about how we judge the financing of our schools? Because that was the issue. So that's, and one last thing. I loved the article on the front page of the Concord Bridge.
Yeah, it was great, wasn't it?
It was great. One thing I ask us to think about is we have said, if we keep going this way, we will end up in Proposition 2.5. We haven't explained what that is and why that would be such a bad thing. So, I mean, I think,
This is part
I
of
mean, I
all
think
this.
that I would have liked the story to have gone on to say, and this is what'll happen. Okay.
So for the
thanks.
record, we didn't write the story. so-
No, I know.
We're
No,
talking-
but it was like a cliffhanger, So,
You can write a letter to the editor on that. So Carlin,
And Lois has her hand.
I like the idea of putting something out, and I think the utility bills are far better than property bills. Keep in mind, a quarter of our residents don't pay property taxes. They rent. but a lot of them have utilities. So I think that's the better mechanism, frankly.
Lois? And then-
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on something Kathy said. I think part of what appealed to me about what the group of us talked about is exactly the point Don made, smaller bite-sized chunks of things and giving people information and background information in more digestible chunks earlier in the process. Because I think part of our communications issue is that we do our work and we are transparent and the meetings are open, but people don't necessarily attend. And then at the end, we produce a document that is fairly weighty and gets into the specifics of what we did. But at that point, it's too late for someone to engage with the process, and it's a lot to take in. So I think that this approach of educating people on some of the basic concepts and just explaining in a very straightforward, simple way what it is we do and how we arrive at our recommendations will become context for that report. And you can't control what people read or what they take in, but at least we can provide the information and give people the option of becoming more, getting a deeper understanding that will help them react. So I'm happy with the approach we came up with.
Hold on. We'll go with Dee and then Lindsay.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like us also to discuss, because we've talked about how we're going to inform, but how about outreach? Any comments on outreach and to whom do we outreach?
Lindsay, and then Greg, and then Kathy.
So I just think that in our first communication, it would be a good idea to end with a request for topics that anyone would like to know more about for our little blurbs. And I think in every time we communicate, we should end with a request for suggestions and feedback and a way to get in touch with us so that we can keep it an open dialogue.
Greg, Kathy, and Quasi. Go ahead.
So I like the timeline approach you have
Yep.
here, and keeping it up to date, I think is going to be the one challenge. So for example, if we send it out in the Concord Bridge, there's that blurb of that month, right? But then if somebody doesn't read that and they come to budget or town hall, they want to see what we've done, right? We need to keep a historical context of those so that they can read all of what we've done throughout the whole year. And I know by, work and stuff, this stuff can go stale fast, right? So if it's not kept up to date, people are just gonna be like, oh, yeah, that's not kept up to date. So I think this is great to do this. My one concern is similar to like the public hearings, right? Even the school public hearing, had 20, 40, I don't remember the number of people that actually showed up to talk about it, as opposed to the number of people that came out to town meeting, right? And some of it, we were duplicating, saying it at the public hearing, and then we had to say it again at town meeting. How do we also influence people to come to the public hearings, right? Not just exactly what we're doing, but that get them engaged more. And I feel like that doesn't happen unless something that affects them in the negative way comes out, right? If somebody said we need $1 million for waste, everybody would be like, okay, you know what I mean? But the school is down $1 million. Everybody's like, oh, like we're gonna come for that, right? So I think it's keeping it up to date. Keeping it fresh is going to be a big part of this, and make sure that we do that, and all concise in one.
Yep. Kathy, Quasi, and then Mary. So go ahead.
This is a question for the subcommittee,
The task force.
the task force.
That has
Okay.
been disbanded, but keep going.
Okay. Having been an observer of the school committees, we, the finance committee, has an observer, but there's really no discussion about finance or the finance committee. There's talk about their budget, but the interaction, I don't know what the answer is, but I want to lay it out there in terms of when you talk about outreach, is there a way that the finance committee can have more of a voice on the agenda of the school committee while it's in session? Because those are the people that are the parents that are listening to the school committee is where the feedback gets out to the rest of the rest of the parents in terms of what's going to be positive and negative for the school.
So let me address that directly, and then I know Quasi's been waiting, so we'll go to Quasi.
Sure.
So, so Tracy and Alexa and I have been talking over the last month or two. One of the things we're going to start to do, we have a joint meeting next July. Number one, I think they've talked about making sure that finance committee related topics are bundled together on their agenda to make it easier for our liaisons to go provide input and whoever else is listening to the committee. So there's a number of steps we're going to take to actually work more closely together and communicate throughout the course of the year. So those are just some of the steps we're going to take. So
Because it's like an us and them.
I understand that.
when you
When it
observe.
comes to-
We did have the.
No,
meeting
I'm
a few months
just
ago.
saying
So,
during the sessions.
Got it. Quasi.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, I agree with Greg in terms of utility bill, inserting anything else, because, anytime I get utility bill, I'm standing in front of the trash, most of it is going in the trash, and I'm just highlighting how much I have to pay, and that's it.
Yep.
I don't know if I want to read anything else when I'm getting, bad news. The second comment is, have we looked into, figuring out who really reads the book that we send out? I'll just say, it may not fit in this context, but when I'm lecturing, sometimes, students are not listening. So I would put in, questions within, my Zoom link, and if somebody's not reading, I know right away. So what I'm saying is maybe we should try to think about ways we can maybe understand who is reading the book. And
Sorry, yeah, go ahead and then
and my
I'll.
last comment is also, can we do like a short video of what the process is, and then put it on the websites, and people can just go and click on it and listen to it for like 3 minutes.
That's a good idea. I like
Great idea.
Good idea.
that.
So I think are they reading? I don't know that we can do a literacy. Can we have them take a quiz before we give them the ballot at annual meeting?
No, I think, but we
The Supreme
can,
Court's kind of ruled on that one.
we can actually ask the moderator to put that as a question for next year. Did how useful was the finance report? Did you read the finance report? Maybe since she's here, we could ask.
Hopefully she says that's unanimous and I so do declare.
No one, so Carmen and then Mary. So can you come to the microphone because we've got folks remote?
So a couple things about that. One is, the town does a survey also, an annual survey, and that's another place that you could have a conversation if there's something in particular that you would like every citizen in town to get asked in the annual town services survey. You can talk with the town manager about that. I don't know what the plan is for when that goes out this year or what the questions will be. Another is that interestingly, it would be so much easier to track how many people were looking at the finance committee report if it was posted online, because you would know who accessed it versus you have no idea when it shows up in the mailbox. Did anyone not just recycle it? Or, you have no idea. And then the other thing I'll add is part of my exit survey was, how can we get you information? And I asked people to rank I gave them like 8 or 10 different ways to get in touch with them, social media, the Concord Bridge, the website, news and notices, direct mail. The top 4, number 1 was the website. Number 2 was news and notices. Number Actually, I'm so sorry. Number 2 was the Concord Bridge. Number 3 was news and notices, and number 4 was direct mail. And what surprised me about that was that nobody said social media was their primary way of getting news about. Yeah, no. But TikTok was not one of the options.
What
but,
was the fourth one?
the 4th one was direct
Direct
mail.
Direct mail. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So those were the 4 key ways that people were getting their information. I also asked them how many people went to the hearings and how many watched them on Minuteman Media. And, a surprising number of people don't go to the hearings, but do watch them online after the fact, which is kind of surprising, but.
But that's good,
That's good, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, but so it's a
Yeah.
good thing that we record those and they're on the website so people can go watch those. And that's it for now.
Good, thank
Gail, I
you.
assume if somebody has stats, like click stats for our website, right?
You could probably get that.
Probably get that information.
Mary,
I'm not gonna tell you, you clicked 27.
No, I know, but like in general.
Thank you, Prashar, for giving me this time. First of all, I think this work is great, what you're doing, and I think it's important.
sorry,
The work you're doing is great and it's important. But something that occurred to me as I was listening to you is one of the tools you have available to you to increase the awareness around town of the role of the FinCom as far as town governance is through your observer assignments. So when you're observing and you're talking to people in the committees that you're observing, these are engaged people. And if you think of what is the charge of the FinCom, the charge of the FinCom is beyond the guideline process. You're focusing on your charge is to advise the town on all things financial and the acquisition and disposition of land. So when you're in a meeting, this is your opportunity to talk to engaged people and advise them on the financial implications of their work. So that is a great opportunity for you to do some outreach. So I would urge you to, when you do your observer assignments, to really take that seriously, go to the meetings, make connections with the people, make recommendations about the financial implications and the trade-offs that we're facing.
yep,
Thank you.
proactive observers. Yep, thank you. Good. Alexa?
So interestingly, I have a little in response to
I'm
sort of,
sorry, I should probably be asking people for names and addresses.
sorry, you should. Alexa Anderson, 14 Park Lane. I'm the chair of the Concord School Committee. Kathy, when I listened to what you had mentioned about sort of some interaction, when, for example, we engage at the school committee in our budgeting process, I do think it's very important that when we all work collaboratively, and again, Parashar has made mention several times that we're trying to make some efforts to do more of that. But I think it is worth mentioning that your sort of role is it from when I look at, I think it's MGL chapter 7134.
Not
I think-
33.
I think, so when you look at that, your job is to advise on a guideline.
Mhm.
Then you kind of pass the baton to the legislative body, which is town meeting. Their job is to then appropriate the guideline. And then you guys have kind of concluded your role, and it is not your role to then determine how we spend our guideline. So I get worried, which is why I think Parashar and I are trying to define really specific roles, that we don't confuse those things. And I think it would be not appropriate to get you guys into the process when we are talking about how we're going to allocate and spend our money. That is not your role. So I just think that's important, and that's mass general law. That's not my opinion.
Okay, so I
That's
want
not-
to comment because I've heard,
So, hold on, no. Kathy, just hold on
Okay.
1 second before you.
I
comment.
just want to make sure we're all doing it right.
So is there any other input? And then I'll let Kathy comment and then we will, because I don't want to turn this into a
no,
debate.
I just know I have,
So I appreciate the input and go
I
ahead.
have a question. I'm hearing an observer is an observer. So I took my role to be an observer. I did not engage or try to talk about financial responsibility when I was observing your committee meetings. So again, it would help if we are clear what the role of the observer is and what participation they can have.
So Peggy and then Greg, did you want to say something?
No, I was
Okay.
saying, yes,
Yep.
I agree with that.
Okay,
I
good.
was saying, yes, I agree with definition of the observer and what we should do.
Is to be an observer.
So just very, very quickly, and Mary, this is partly in response to you. This is a 15-member committee. No, none of us can observe and provide, I don't know, advice or input on behalf of the committee. That would be getting way over your skis. And I've done that before and it's really embarrassing. So there are way too many people on this committee to provide input as an observer in terms of policy. So that's all.
I guess from my perspective, I always thought of us as liaisons and more than observers. And so as a liaison, I think you can certainly observe, but again, I don't think anything's wrong with anybody saying, hey, I'm speaking personally, I'm not speaking on behalf of the finance committee. However, have you considered the implications of A, B, and C? And at least that way, that's brought up. And then if that committee says, geez, we'd love to hear the finance committee's official opinion, or if they don't, you come back and you say, hey, this is what happened. I'd like the finance committee to deliberate and voice official finance committee position.
Yeah.
That can also happen. That's happened in the past while I've been on FinCom. And I think that's natural to do, because otherwise, what's the point of observing if you're just going back and reporting? All of us can simply just watch the minutes without input into what's going on. So that's, I would hope that as liaisons, we take that proactive approach. Again, speaking individually, but recognize sometimes you might want to come back to the finance committee, or that committee might ask for the finance committee's official opinion, and we can then talk about it.
So Chris, I'm going to look at you for this one. When I joined FinCom, it was observers, right? And like numbers of years ago, 3 years ago, it was observers, right? And I took that to mean is I'm watching the meeting and I'm just going to report back financial information to the FinCom. I'm not going to participate. If I have a question, of, hey, what do you said this, what was it? That was fine. But I think to Kathy's point, we definitely do now. It sounds now we need a definition of whether we're liaisons or we're observers, so that everybody for the new members are clear on that. I have always thought of it as observers. So when I saw, liaison, I was kind of, okay, maybe we just change the term, but did we change the definition of what we're doing? So.
And reciprocally,
reciprocally,
the committees that we observe or liaise have to understand what role you are asking us to fill.
Fair enough.
I think we're both. Because during a meeting, we are there to observe.
Can we just, rather than everybody expressing what they think it is, define it, and that's what we
No,
go for
and
forward?
I'm trying to do that. We observe. It is not our role to intercede on decision-making that committee is undertaking. But at the same time, we should feel as though we can, after a meeting, if we want to discuss something with the chair or a member of the committee that we're observing, that would be a liaison role, so that we can be better informed. Maybe we didn't understand something that was decided or have a question about what was decided. So being able to communicate with them, that is a liaison role. We're not observing anymore because we're actually communicating with them. So we're liaising with them. So that would, to me, would be the distinction.
Greg, I like the idea of writing it down. I'm going to raise my hand. I'm going to write a definition, circulate it to the group. And I don't know if we can do this. We'll figure out if we can do it through open meeting law or not. But if we don't hear any objections, what I'd like to also do after that is maybe reach out to at least the committees to whom we are going to be observing / liaisoning with. And just inform them that this is kind of what we're planning to do, and see if anybody's got a problem with it. I don't think anybody would. Does that sound like a step forward? And if I can't circulate the definition to everybody, we'll do it at the next meeting, right? We'll do it in an open meeting law. To me, right.
But
I understand that, but then if I don't get a lot of input or I get one comma or whatever, then I can, so we'll figure that out in a open meeting law compliant manner.
individuals responding, not.
Yep, I understand. If you see him being pinstripes 2 months from now, you know what happened.
It's already written somewhere.
It may be written, so I'll take it upon myself to do that. That's a great idea. Let's go back to the outreach plan. So, because we've been at it about 30 minutes and I'd like to
Yep.
close the loop here.
Yep.
We've gotten some good ideas. I'm not going to list them all right now because I can't see it right now. But people generally agree. And by the way, the stuff in green, these are drafts, hypotheticals. Doesn't mean we're going to necessarily stick to all these, but that hopefully gives you a sense of what we would do. I did talk to Kari about these informational releases because the idea would be that after, for example, today's meeting, if we decided this was a consequential thing, we might write up 4 bullets or a paragraph that says the committee discussed and voted on an outreach plan. It will be boom, 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 and then that can be sent out and put on the website, historically, emails, et cetera. It doesn't substitute for actual meeting minutes, but it's quicker time frame for today's world rather than waiting for minutes and people slogging through meetings or minutes. So that's basically what we can do if folks are comfortable with that.
So can we at a meeting have a discussion on a topic and then ask for opinions and then be able to actually post that someplace?
When you say ask for opinions, what do you?
Well, ask for a decision and how many agree or how many
Well,
don't
that's what it would
agree,
be. It
that
would
sort
be,
of
we
thing.
decided on the
Because-
guidelines. The guidelines are A, B, and C, and here's the table and boom. Right? It doesn't get into so-and-so said this and so-and-so did this because that's left for the minutes.
Right. Okay, if we can do it that way,
It's the facts
because
only.
otherwly,
It's just a brief outcomes.
Exactly.
It's
That's
right,
exactly what
okay.
it is.
okay, because I get really upset when we can't post minutes until after the committee receives them and,
Kari-
that's like a month. So
Already
somebody
understood
comes
what we were
to,
doing. She understood
right,
very clearly
so-
what we're doing. She thought it was a good idea. So.
Who
as
did?
long- Kari, the town clerk.
Good.
So as long as we're sticking to,
Did Gail think it's a good idea?
well, Gail's not writing it. Don is writing it.
So Gail has no opinion.
The leads are the guidelines clerk.
That's enough work.
Gail's in favor.
So very clearly Don is
Okay.
responsible and then I guess Lois and I will approve them, if you will. So at least there's a second set of eyes factually on that, right? And then we could post them and do all sorts of stuff. If folks agree with this, then I think we can get started on just getting a 1-page, 2-page budget, basic budgets, get an infographic on the roadmap and get some of this going while we've got a little bit of a lull.
I don't know why you couldn't post that.
We can, that's what we're
Yeah.
saying.
And no, not, you don't have to have anything with it. I mean, this is what we're looking at for the year. Boom. And you have that.
Well, okay, well, we can get into the content, but yeah. And then I think the community outreach is TBD on groups and clubs. So Dee, I think you were looking for potential volunteers throughout the course of the year, right? To raise their hands and say, hey, so-and-so's meeting, they'd love to have somebody from FinCom come talk, et cetera. So is that how you want to approach it? How do you want to approach it? Or do you want people to raise their hands now or what's your thought?
On that one in particular, I'd like if everybody here can decide what kind of group, is it from their own observer or is there a group that they're aware of that they think would be interested in hearing from the FinCom to provide that input? You could use me, you can send it to me directly. And then if you want to be that person, because I think that makes it more effective. If you're aware of a group that you want to contact, or you're a member of a group that you think would be interested in knowing the financial implications of what's going on in the town, that would be great, because I don't think Parashar can attend all of those meetings. I think there are probably some, where he'd be a good person to go, but I think all of us are representatives of the finance committee, so it's all of our opportunity if you want. So if you have a group that you would like to contact, or go out and talk with their staff, please let me know. I'll jot it down. And if there's not a big response, we'll start looking at, who wants to go to this place or that place and ask for volunteers. All right.
And I'll turn that slightly more actionable. So when you send it to D, right, and we'll include it along with the things to do. And so folks have a sense of who's making the requests or who we're going to talk to. And so we'll just keep that on a running basis. Carbon and then Greg.
My outreach suggestion for you is that you consider as a general principle that if you want to reach the people, it's a really good idea to go where the people are. And the select board a few years back had wonderful success putting up a little table with green cards at the ag fair in soliciting volunteers for committees. You can go to the 4th of July thing. You can, there are any number of events in Concord where the finance committee can show up and have a little table and make themselves available.
Good, like that.
Okay.
Greg, and then I'm gonna go around the room, see if anybody has any other last thoughts, and then we're gonna go to the next topic.
I think one thing with community outreach, I know I wouldn't be totally comfortable going out to a community and being like, hey, I am the representative of the FinCom. If I had to do that, I would like to have some backing material that is common to all of these outreach programs that, that member can reference, right? Because you'll get some questions that not every single member, Chris is well above my head in a lot of this stuff, so she would be able to handle stuff. But, it would be good to have something that is common across so that everybody knows, okay, this is the intent of it. The intent of it is not to go deep on the school budget or, this
Right,
budget.
right.
The intent of this is to explain what we do. And here's a little packet of information too,
And
something to that effect.
Excellent idea, and maybe the first few primers we do is all we need, right?
Exactly.
Exactly, completely. By the way, Chris makes up half of our answers, so don't think. Any last comments before we close the topic? And I want to thank Dee for pulling this together. So thank you very much. And very productive. And thanks everybody for doing it. Thank you very much, Dee. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next topic. We are now talking about capital plan, primer and town process. So just before Gail goes into this, what we have tried to do is put together in one document capital planning process and the current status of 5 and 10-year projects for both the town and the schools. We have, CPS has a 5-year set of plans, which are in there today as well. Regional High School is in the process of developing theirs. They don't have a current list, number one. The goal and the intent, I think, based on the interest, as you'll see in a few minutes, that many of us have around capital planning and spending, is to put in place one document that has tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Today, Gail is going to provide a verbal overview of the town's planning process. We're not going to talk about specific projects today because that's not the purpose. Next month, when we have the joint meeting with the school committees, Bob will talk about the school's planning process. And again, the goal is not to talk about specific projects at that meeting, but just the process so that we all are better prepared and informed as we start thinking about the fiscal year 25 budget process, which will, of course, include tier 1 and tier 2 projects as well. Okay, so with that, having said that, let me turn it over to Gail and she'll hit the highlights for what the current process is. They are revisiting some of it. She doesn't know have all the answers, but this is at least a current process right now. Take it away, Gail.
That was my whole presentation.
No.
So what I was asked to do was pull up, and I'm going to say this is from 2019, was the capital planning process that they had done. So the document that is in here is what came out of that task force group about the process. We started conversations, I will say last year, I think Mary, you were part of a meeting we had in the fall or early January to sort of start kicking around the process. So I had cautioned that this was a little bit early because we're sort of not quite in the old process. We're not in a new process, so it's early to have any of these conversations. So we did start talking about better ways to think about the capital process. We're just not there yet because we had already gone through last year's process, and people, hard to believe we're still in fiscal 23, so we have not started planning 25 yet. It's very hard to live in 3 worlds. It's hard to live in 2. So 3 is incredibly difficult. So what I put together here was the Appendix D that came out of the capital planning process, which high level is sort of where we were. We tried to make a few changes as we went through the capital process last year, but sort of high level is that tier 1 is, I've heard it, cash, pay go. It's non-debt funded capital projects, which is typically spending up to 100,000. Tier 2 is 100 to 5 million, which both tier 1 and tier 2 are within the levy. They are within the guidelines number that the finance committee provides to us. So capital is part of the guidelines process. Even though they're budgeted differently, when you match the 2 numbers together, the bottom line has to be within the guidelines figure. Tier 3 is the excluded debt. Those are projects over $5 million. Currently, there aren't, right, and just aren't any new ones on the horizon immediately right now. And again, this meeting is not to talk about any specifics of projects. I did include the CPS one is the one that was presented as we were doing the town meeting information. The one that's in there for the town is what we were using to sort of create new spreadsheets when we were doing it back in December. So again, it is stale, but we have not started the process going into next year. So definitely not here to talk about any of the specific projects or line items on there, because again, we'll be starting the process over in the fall. It is some of the items that we're looking, again, this all needs to be discussed with the town manager. I know that it'll probably be discussed select board as well, is thoughts of how to think about the capital process. What is the right amount for cash? What is the right amount for debt? Should it be within guidelines? Should we think about capital not being within guidelines and more so being a targeted number? Here is the percent that should be spent for capital across the universe. So these are all items that we're discussing that we have not fully vetted out. We had a really good meeting back in January just to sort of lay some foundation for it, but it does take time, and it is a process to get there, and there are multiple folks involved. But I will say it is, for the town side, my 1 year of having gone through this, it was actually a very collaborative process. We did the spreadsheet that we put in here was a sort of new look that Bob and I brought to the table to sort of say, this is all of our capital together. It's very paper-based. There are many forms, as you can see on here, that all go out and all come back. And I'm like, why can't we just use one spreadsheet and everyone update the spreadsheet each year? That we spent a lot of time. I will say, we had all of the department heads, all of SMT sat together and talked about capital. So you'll hear the concept, I'll use it, horse trading. So obviously there is a finite amount of money available. So we do get all of SMT together to talk about, I'm going to jinx, so I'm going to use bad examples. Hate to say this, is the roof going to cave this year, or is it going to cave next year? Is the fire truck going to die this year or next year? Okay, you need the roof, you need the fire truck. And we all came together collectively to look at what is going to fit in each year and then make it repeatable. So every X number of years, you're going to need this. So you do it, and then 5, 7, 10 years, you do your best guess. Then every year you have to reassess it because your escalation may have changed. So it's a very iterative process, but we did spend a lot of time last year laying the foundation and setting up the schedule so people can truly see the impact of what we're doing and how to think about changing some of the purchases. Do you buy turnout gear every year? Or do you say every 5 years we're buying turnout gear? So it's a set cost every 5 years. So we go through that level of detail for each item and really assess when items need to happen and how to move them about. So it's hard to go into a lot of detail because we're actually looking to make some changes, but there's a lot of discussions. There's a lot of talk with the town manager. I know there's talk with potentially the select board on what some of the capital planning sessions in the fall might look like. So I don't have all of the answers because I personally cannot speak for the select board or the town manager, but everyone has been very open to having discussions on how to make this a more iterative, repeatable, transparent process. But you can see we do have incredible detail as to what makes up a 10-year plan.
So can I just ask some overarching questions, maybe for clarity? 'Cause I appreciate the detail. So we have 3 tiers of capital projects, right? Tier 1, up to $100,000, 1-year life, et cetera, whatever those requirements are. Tier 2 is up to 5 million, basically 100 to 5 million. And then tier 3 is anything over 5 million would probably be excluded debt, although, right?
Tier 3 is excluded debt, yes.
Does it have to be?
That is
Yeah,
the
if we
way
had
the
$5 million
current-
fund somewhere, does it have to be excluded though? To count as tier 3?
Yeah.
If you were looking for funding, that would be tier 3 based upon the way the
So it's got to be both. 5 million, over 5 million and excluded. Okay. The question I have, and the document talks about, generally speaking, 7 to 8% of the town's budget to capital improvements, of which 5 percentage points are for, no more than 5 are for debt service. So we're talking 2 to 3% for
currently the
tier
way
1
this-
and tier 2, right? Have we had some guidelines around of the 2 to 3%, what is appropriate for tier 1 and tier 2? How do we do that? Do we back into the number or?
This actually is tier 2.
Is debt service
So-
mean we're gonna borrow?
Yes, debt
So-
service
so-
is tier
So
2.
what you said isn't right. So it's the 2 to 3% is the cash.
So 7 to 8.
It doesn't matter if it's
So
it's
if
tier
you look
1 or
at it-
tier 2, it's
Sorry,
cash.
7 to 8.
8 is total capital, excluding total capital, not including excluding debt, yes.
Tier 3,
Exactly. That's what I said. So 7 to 8 is tier 1 and tier 2.
right. And
Right.
2 to 3% of that can be cash. Doesn't matter what tier it's in.
And,
Okay.
Right.
well, it won't be in tier 3, so it is
No,
tier
but
1 and
it's-
2.
It's tier 1 or 2.
And I'm trying to go one level deeper, which is how do we distinguish roughly what is appropriate for tier 1 and versus tier
Those are the
2?
discussions that will
Or-
be ongoing
okay.
in the fall.
Have we had in the past this notion that out of the 2 to 3, 2% of those points should be tier 2 and 1?
It's 7 to 8% is total.
Oh, but you're excluding 5 for debt service.
5%, debt service is tier 2, which is included in the 5 to 7%. Debt service doesn't mean excluded. It just means you
No,
borrow
it's
funds,
meaning, okay, you have 7 to 8, you have an 8% pool. Let's just call it 8.
which is tier 1 and tier 2.
Exactly. And of that, you're saying of that 8 percentage points, $8,
5%.
$5 is for debt service, no?
Borrowed.
It's borrowed.
It's not debt
It's
service.
borrowed funds.
So, should be allocated to debt service is what it said. and
Debt
That's why. I
service
was
is what
confused.
That's
I-
the
I
language
didn't know if
of
you're
the.
talking about cumulative debt service.
No, just debt service for that year.
It means it's borrowed, right? So say borrowed. They're gonna borrow for that item.
The 5% borrowed capital has been a town policy for at least 20 years, maybe even longer. And I think what we're hearing is that this year and last year, we had new people in the finance department that are revisiting that long-standing tradition.
Right, and
Whether the 100,000 is the right dollar figure to say for borrowing, it could be less expensive over the long term,
It-
not to
sure.
borrow as
It
much
will
as
be.
we're borrowing.
Yeah.
So how much you fit in a year changes when you do cash.
so
versus
I'm still confused. So help me with a simple example. If $100 is the total town budget, right? We're saying $5 to $8 are for capital replacement and acquisition, right? Just call it $8 for simplicity's sake. So where does of that $8, is 5 going to be spent by borrowing?
Correct.
So there's $3 left, which is cash.
Correct.
And my question is, how do we typically split the $3 between tier 1 and tier 2?
It's cash is tier 1, tier 2 is your debt service. Tier 2 is your borrowed.
Oh, so we're always borrowing everything in tier 2.
Yes. We
Thank you.
borrow
That
every
part
year.
was not clear.
I don't know.
Okay, that part was not clear. Thank you.
I think they should call it debt, not debt service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Debt service is interest and.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought that was.
It's
Thank you.
debt service
Okay.
because when you pay it, you're paying the principal and interest, so it's debt service when you're building your budget, so it's
That 5%
actually,
is interest payment and.
it's the total cost of
Cool.
borrowing.
Okay.
Yeah. So that,
It is not the debt, not how much.
It's not the cumulative debt, it's
Some of
whatever
it.
you're paying that year
It's
for
just
debt
what you're
service.
borrowing.
Then I'm confusing.
I'm also
It's the
confused
principal.
because
It's not full debt service, right? So,
Right.
our debt service is.
correct. So she's talking about principal. I
but
believe.
when we're building the budget, we have to figure the debt service because within the guidelines number, it's the principal, the interest, and the cash capital.
Right, it is. But when you're building a capital budget, you're talking about the principal.
We're talking about the principal and
Which is
then
what we're
we can
talking about here.
afford.
So it's principal.
Okay,
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
do, here's what we're going to do, and then here's how we have to.
It's the
The
funding
reality,
source.
yeah,
All it is
yeah.
the funding source, right?
For 20 years, it's pretty equalized out, except for the interest rate.
Correct, but as the interest rates go up, the less you can borrow, the longer it takes you to
Right. But
complete
it's,
a project.
but you also have to look at what's the investment that we have, right? So the
Yeah.
level of investment in facilities and equipment and has changed over time. So is 7 to 8% the right number? I don't know.
right.
And is the
I don't know the
borrowing
answer.
Yeah,
split?
I don't know the answer either. I guess one of the things I was trying to understand is there a target and then you're feeding projects in to meet the target? Or are you actually have a set list of projects and then each year do you say, hey, this year, even though we've got all these needs, we can only afford to do these 5? What's
All of
been,
the above.
so sometimes you're feeding projects in because you've got money.
Sometimes you may have room in a year because a project falls off or there's funding in a year, so you slot projects in. Other years when there is not, you pull projects out, which is why the discussion on the concept of where does capital belong inside guidelines or outside of guidelines to say if capital is meant to be X%, it is X%, it goes over here. If
Right.
it's part of guidelines, if your guidelines go up by X amount by default,
Right,
capital is up
right.
to be
Is,
cut in order to meet
right.
guidelines,
Is it non-discretionary or is it discretionary, right? So that's how we tend
above,
to.
below the line.
Yep, no, fair enough. Carlin, you had a question.
Yeah, two things. First, if something is not within guidelines, does that mean it's not within the FinCom's jurisdiction?
You can still ask about it, but it's just not within guidelines.
Okay.
So it's not set by guidelines. but
Second
it's still
thing-
within our purview.
Thank you. Second thing, how does the horse trading actually occur when you have so many departments wanting money for capital improvement projects? And do you include all the departments at the same time? Because, for example, I've heard that the recreation department was out of the room when certain budget allocations were made, and that's why they didn't get certain
Where
budgets.
those- I can't,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna comment on that. I can, but
But
we also have to
how does it
remember
work?
recreation is a revolving fund and you've got BD, which is an enterprise fund. So there are different water and sewer,
Yeah.
BD, separate process. They're not part of this. So it is as the senior management team, we're all participants in the discussions that we have. So it's not 30 people in a room. It is the senior management team. And they bring the folks that are necessary. So.
And
all
Rec's part of that
individuals-
SMT?
Excuse me.
Is Rec not part of that SMT because they weren't at work?
I cannot, I'm not gonna get into the mechanics of who was and wasn't in the room, but their information. You will see there are recreation items on here. Again, it depends on whether it was. BD Center, recreation revolving or operating funds. They're separate and distinct processes, but you will see. I know for a fact because I just borrowed money to replace. I'm gonna either get it basketball, tennis or pickleball. I don't know which one of the 3 because they all blend to me. So there are recreation items in here, so. I'm not certain where that information is coming from, that they weren't part of it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, one question. What do you do with the projects that you know are going to be $60 million? Like if you need a new public safety building? Where does that fall in? Does it fall any place in your
Yeah. So
discussion?
that is it, that would that would clearly be excluded debt. So that would not necessarily be part of the
I
tier
un-
1 and tier 2. That does come up when we do the meetings in the fall where we're talking about tier 3 capital, which would be
Okay.
excluded debt. So
And that would be your planning, looking at 5, 10, 20
it would be a
years
lot
or?
further than that. I know last year when we talked about it, there was a lot of discussion about the Kais Road campus
Right.
and what CPW, DPLM would look like, the fire safety buildings, facilities themselves. So there's a lot of work that has to go into that because you have to do your feasibility to figure out what it is you need. You have to look at what space you have available. Where can you build it? Can you build up? Can you build out? Do you actually have the land? So I know this year we had funding either for 24, 25 to actually start to look at the feasibility studies. Those projects tend to
Okay.
take a very long period of time because you have to look at exactly what it is you need, and you have to figure out if you actually have the space to do it.
So if I understand you correctly, you're doing the feasibility studies now and some of the,
For some
So,
of them.
so let's not focus on specific projects, right?
I'm not,
Because-
I'm not.
Yeah,
on-
fair enough.
The tier 3, that's where the process typically in the fall had been, is to do the forward looking to
Yeah.
say. Before my time, but the one a couple of years ago was a lot on the middle school about. That was the big project that was going on, and now there's discussion about what would it be, the public safety building, would it be?
Gotcha.
CPW, again, those are much larger discussions than what happens for the tier
Yep.
1 and tier 2. It's a lot easier for me to say I can move a server. Than I can.
Build a building. Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments? Lindsay?
And this might be kind of an elementary question, but are the tier 1 and tier 2 limits of that 100,000 to 5 million, are those your internal policies or is that like law?
That is not law.
Okay, so
That
that's
is
just your own
what-
definitions? Or,
That is the town of Concord.
okay, so that.
Not Gail's.
So to change that is like a town force. Okay,
Town of Concord, that is what came out of, I know that's what came out of the capital planning, and it probably
Okay.
dates back years and years, but that is an internal, that is not defined by any.
okay, so that to
Not my
change that is like a town meeting situation?
No, that
No.
is more- that's
Not
an
even.
internal process, but
Okay.
it would involve discussion with, I know this discussion at,
Select board.
Select board, town manager, again, it is the town manager's budget. There is the debt policy, so there's a lot that goes into it, and it's not something as much as people would love to hear, you can just change this on a dime and say it's no longer 100,000. We're gonna say anything from 0 to 500,000 is going to be
Mhm.
cash. You're gonna do one project
Yeah.
next year because you don't, you have to work towards it in order to get the funding and the thoughts of how it's going to be funded
Mhm.
before you can just really shift. So we tried to make changes last year to look at some of the limits and say, does it really make sense to borrow for X number of years for $100,000 project? Like,
It doesn't.
you wouldn't, like, I look at it and say, what would the prudent person do? I had people come to me and they would laugh and I'd be like, seriously, you legitimately borrow your own funds for that? And many people like, yeah, like, yeah. So it's a lot, it's not as easy as it sounds to just completely change the process because there's a lot of pieces and parts, and because of how we do the budget, you can't just say we're now gonna swap all to cash. So it's a process that we've started to have meetings and discussions, but it's gonna take a bit.
Chris, did you have a
Yeah, I
question?
do.
Don had a-
I do.
Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, so do you know what your timeline is then? So you're in the middle of a process to relook at it. When do you think you'll come out with some recommendations?
So we're hoping to start it in the July timeframe. And again, I know it sounds crazy. We're really trying to close out
It's all right.
sort of 23. So we were looking to really start these discussions in the July and August timeframe and start the discussions internally with all the folks to really look at the projects that are needed so we can, and the goal is we're definitely not opposed to showing tier 1 and tier 2 when we do it, because it is all in transparency. It's just the timing of when some of the meetings happen, and can we really pivot everything to say, okay, all department heads, July 1st, tell us all your capital needs, when they are usually doing it September, October. So we're sort of trying to thread the needle a bit.
But you think whatever recommendations you come up with would be implemented for the 25 budget?
We're hoping we'll
Yeah.
be able to make some changes. I don't think we'll be able to get there in one
Yeah.
fell swoop,
Okay.
because again, especially if you start to think of the concept of, is it or is it not within guidelines?
Right.
That's a pretty big discussion.
It's a big discussion for us too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So we would. be
That's why we
engaged in
want to be
that.
careful and
Yeah.
thoughtful and have it all thought out and be able to present what it would
Right.
look like.
Do you have, so one of the things that I'm hoping you guys are thinking about, or perhaps you already have, but is how do we right size the spends, right? So one of the things I think that the committee would find very helpful, if you look at the big categories, which if it's computers or equipment or vehicles or facilities, right? What rules of thumb are other municipalities using, does Concord use, sort of think about what's the right, this percentage business of how much should we be spending to replace it? I think you have to know what the value is of that stuff first. You have to understand what the size of your investment is. So I'd be interested in that. You know, how do you figure out whether you're going to replace versus update a piece of equipment or a vehicle? Those sort of policies I think would be of interest to us in trying to understand the capital plan. Buy versus lease, right? What are the things that you guys are thinking about when you're doing that? So that's the stuff I'm
And
interested
those
in
get-
learning about.
There are obviously pros and cons to all of those. Leasing, depending on what you're leasing, that can get tricky because there are limits to how long you can lease under municipal law. The other interesting part is once you start to lease, it almost becomes a fixed cost, not a capital cost, because you don't control it. If you start leasing items, then you know every X number of years, it's not like you can skip a year or say, I can get another year out of my fleet of
But you can
computers.
lease to buy, right? So you can lease with a buy option. Which is very common to
Lease-
finance things up front. and
You
so
can,
forth.
it's a little trickier in municipal
Okay.
finance, but yes, those are all items that we actually do. That is a process when we actually all sat in this room going through every item, like, okay, I felt like a little kid because I wanted to go see these trucks that I didn't realize how expensive the trucks were. I think the houses are expensive. Wait till you try to buy a truck. So even just understanding, okay, why, when is the last time? And you'll notice in some of the schedules, you'll see here is not a DPW person, here's the Vector that they bought. It should have a 10-year life. 10 years out in the capital plan, you're already going to see a placeholder. So we're already building it to say a fire truck should last X, turnout gear should last Y, this should last. So we're constantly putting, and we're doing the same. I will say even for recreation we had a lot of stuff in there for recreation. It's sort of new because it's always been this outlier where we're like, okay, here are the fields, here's what needs to be replaced. How long is it? What's the average lifespan of a tennis court? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? So you put it and then you plop it in X number of years out. So we're building a lot of that up, but also remember, as the town is growing, we're acquiring a lot more recreation space. So a lot of these items in here are also new that we're also looking at, okay, we built it. What's it going to take to maintain it? So it's a very iterative process. And we had many meetings going through this with, and when I say horse training, it's adult conversations where people are coming to the table. Obviously, if you have an unlimited number, everyone wants everything day one. But when you say, well, you just bought your car 3 years ago, can it last 5 years? Yeah, you're right. I don't need it now. So that's what I mean when we all sit here and actually do honest assessments of useful life.
Yep, thank you.
I have one other
Oh,
question.
sure.
At the end of your discussions, will you have a written process of how you got from A to Z? Will you just have charts that show what you're doing with each of the entries for tier 1 and tier
We
2?
would have a similar spreadsheet to what's currently in here.
Okay, would you have any documentation that that describes the process that you used? You're telling us that right now. But do you, when you end up with deciding on X versus Y, do you describe that?
Typically, there's aren't minutes and notes taking in them. It's all discussion based, the same as when you do your budget, unless there's some overarching reason why we said this has to be moved from here to here, whether it's life safety, whether something's failing, we would, but if we're moving fire truck from 24 to 25, we're not going to write up a whole, it's sort of discussions, and we might have quick notes in there, but again, this is it's a live, it's a living.
It's in real time.
document that happens.
It's in real time. So if everyone left tomorrow from the members who are working on this project and new people came in, would they have any guidance in terms of how to go about the
We
work
would-
they're going
we
to
would-
do?
We document the process in a memo each year for the folks to say, here, we're starting the capital process. Here's what's to think about. Here's what we're asking folks to do.
Okay.
We're just trying to streamline it so it's
Okay.
not every division having 50
So
Excel
I
spreadsheets
get
that
that,
they're.
but you are documenting how you're going to be going through the process. Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay, so if there are, let me try to just two questions, I guess. One is, how are you aligning with the schools in terms of, are the schools also going to revise their process or not? And if they are or aren't, is there some collaboration going on between the town and the schools in terms of just what the process looks like? The reason I ask that is, at least I think for the FinCom, it would be helpful as we again enter into the budget process. If we can have in one place, here's tier one spending, schools, tier one for towns, tier two for both, going out 5 years, and if necessary, 10 years, whatever you guys decide is appropriate. So I'm hoping that for fiscal year 25, we can actually have that combined list with the goal that we have a broader sense of where our money is going. So I'm just curious, as you guys are revisiting your timelines, are you aligning with the schools in terms of what their
Those are
timelines are so that
That will be.
together we can come to,
Those are discussions that will be ongoing. I will say, we did broach this in the January timeframe. We did, obviously, as we were preparing for town meeting, reach out to the schools to look at what their capital was. We did mention it to the superintendent and the business manager to say, we're thinking of making changes. We need to re-engage folks, knowing the process is separate and they have different
Yep.
governing bodies. So we have gone to them to say, this is what we're starting to think about, but we haven't done much more than that because again, we're trying to close out 20
right? So
or.
fair enough. So I guess what I'm getting at is, that we've got 3 capital planning forums. Whether we have 3 for the year or not, I think is still TBD by the select board and the school committee. But I'm hoping that the public forum for the finance committee, number 2 in November. At that, I think would be a good place if the schools and the towns come together and say, hey, here's our capital plan spending for the next 5 years. Specifically, let's focus on 1, but you've got visibility on 5 and 10, right? That I think would be another step forward where we can sit and actually look at the whole picture. Not focusing just on the operating, but also the capital. So is that something that we can aspire to and get to so that by November, it doesn't have to be etched 110% in stone, but if it's 90% done, it would be helpful.
I will say that is a town manager, select board, school committee. Bigger discussion.
Right.
I cannot speak on behalf of. I can, obviously, those are discussions that are happening, but I cannot. In good faith, commit the school committee to. Produce this. We can work closely and have discussions with them. And I do believe at some point, this is I feel bad if I'm speaking for the select board. A topic as to what they anticipate the capital meetings in the fall to look like if they're looking at it to be just tier 1. Or tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and that is a combination of also having discussions with the town manager as to what those forums look like. So I don't feel I can speak for other elected bodies as to what. I don't have that power to tell them.
Well, Mary, do you want to say something?
I don't know if I'm doing better or worse, but I know, yeah. I know there are discussions, but
On Monday night, the select board is going to be going over the draft of the calendar for the town meeting, and that kicks off with 3 conversations around capital. And 2 of those are with the select board and the school committee, and 1 is with the FinCom. These meetings were recommended by the capital planning task force. First time we held them was last year. And I'll have to say, we learned that, my opinion, maybe we had at least 1 or 2 too many meetings. There wasn't a lot going on. It was confined to tier 3. So when we talk on Monday night and we're talking about the calendar, we will bring up this topic, and I will recommend to the select board that we open it up to tier 1 and tier 2 and enterprise fund capital, because I know that the town has a big backlog of investments that we need for wastewater, for water. And I think this is something that we should shed some light on. So that's what I will be bringing up on Monday night, and we'll see how the rest of the select board feels.
I see nodding heads here that that's a good idea to have a complete picture, tier 1. tier
I would
2.
add, once we get our direction from select board and town manager's office, we then need to go out and obviously shift. A lot of the capital work was sort of done late fall.
Sure.
So if the meetings change, it's especially enterprise funds were done even later because of how their process works. So then it's just sort of, we need to go back and pivot and pull everything forward. So that's why I'm saying it can't be perfect the first year, because we're basically accelerating a
It's
lot.
always
of
a
changes.
process.
That's all right.
It's always a process. You never arrive, but you don't get there unless we start. Right. Alexa, did you want to say something, or you just?
Couldn't hear Mary.
Oh, okay. Mary needs to speak louder.
So, but we do, I mean, it said we will be communicating our process so people can opine on it, but it's a bigger.
Thank you. All right.
You know, the
let's go to the next.
one other comment on this is that the timing is also connects with when town meeting is going to be held in the following year. And there's always, the later we can have town meeting, and we can have it, I think, to the end of June. The later we have that, the better informed both the schools and the town will be in the fall, in the late fall, on the numbers that they will have. Because the schools don't even get their student numbers until October. So asking them to have their budgets and their tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, or however the schools do it in place is difficult for them. So as the town moderator is here tonight, it's just, I think that if we can push back when town meeting is going to be, and it's not her decision, it's the select board decision, but the later we can push that back, the more time you have in order for everybody to have the best estimates they can possibly have by late fall.
We can all come up with the best estimates that we can. Everybody will understand it's not written in stone. Life is not perfect all the time. So speaking of not written in stone, let's go to the next topic, which is the work plan. So I want to thank everybody for input on the work plan. Right off the bat, I want to thank Lindsay for the first couple of slides, because I do not do this.
The graphics.
Not responsible. Lindsay did a great job. And I even suggested maybe we just continue using these for the FinCom. So I'm going to quickly summarize what the conclusions were. Hopefully everybody had a chance to go through this. But in essence, you can see open communication. We talked about that earlier today. Prioritize revenue growth and capital planning. We just spent 30 minutes on capital planning. Clearly that was the feedback from everybody that voted. And the theme, if those are the 3 priorities, we had a number of town and school initiatives, for lack of a better word. The goal would be that we make sure that those initiatives reflect our priorities through the course of the year, basically. And in terms of the scoring, there were, I think, 15 or 16. I prioritized these 6 9, but the 6 and the right-hand side were the next 3, right? So the first 3 on the left-hand side, you can see they're broader topics. And then the other 6 are a little bit more narrow. And they're prioritized based both on the number of votes they receive, but also the weighted average in terms of how many points people assign out of the 20 points, basically. And I'll walk through the detail in a minute as well. But we've got the public school strategic plan. And I know CPS, Alexa, is that almost done or it's in process, 90%? It's complete. So focusing in on that and making sure that we use that as a reference when we're looking at both capital planning and operating requests that come in. Town strategic plan has not been developed. In conversations with Carrie, I know she's thought about it. Good idea, would like to proceed. And I think from our perspective, I heard from all of you that this is something that we ought to urge the town to do. So we ought to focus on that. Middle school building project was another area where the feeling was we ought to continue to monitor how that's going, how late it is, if it's late, not late, et cetera, but just keep our eyes on it. 2229 Main Street. Big project in town, lots of activity, potential for revenue, depending on how the land gets used. There'd be capital planning to the extent, again, depending on what the land use recommendations are. So provide input to that process. The rec department strategy, I think they're undergoing a new strategic plan that probably involve capital planning, probably involve operational impact to the town. BD Center may or may not need funding again, depending on what happens. And then lastly, keeping our eyes in terms of what's coming down the pike for 250th anniversary celebration. So those are the 6 that kind of jumped out based on everybody's feedback. Let me pause here. I'll go to the next couple of slides to go through some details, but take some questions too.
Can you just clarify what the revenue and capital plan is? Is it that particular item supports, but like does have revenue generation?
Well, I'm sorry, say that again.
So for it's right. So for example, 250th anniversary celebration doesn't have a check on revenue or capital planning. Does that mean it has neither of those?
That's right.
So, like, doesn't that have potential revenue opportunity?
It seems like it's got negative revenue. Coming out.
I mean, bringing the people to town, right?
Well,
Right.
so this is so revenue from a town revenue perspective.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry.
So that's what your column
It's not
there,
business revenue, it's town revenue, right?
that's what you're putting up there. Okay.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. Yep.
Yes, Parashar, I did fill this out. I don't think you had the new wastewater fund, and that is a lot, it's showing in your budget as a lot of money. And I just not sure where that is going to fit in terms of who's paying for it.
So we'll go
I
through
think
that.
that's something
Somebody
we-
suggested that at the end. I
Okay.
don't know who it was. So there you go, Carlin did. So these are the
Okay,
ones
no,
that
no.
jumped out. We'll go over ones that went out with the original spreadsheet, and then several folks suggested additional ones. So we can talk about them. This is all just draft, right? But this is what jumped out based on what went out. So the next 2 slides are the actual detail of kind of what went out. And let me just very quickly clarify what the yellow highlights were. We asked for 20 points. Most people spread them out like peanut butter, or at least chunky peanut butter. Other people just put a peanut on one thing or 2 peanuts on 2 items. And so that actually altered the weighted average on a few of them. So what I did in the ones that are yellow was just indicate if you tossed out those votes that got 10 points or more on any one item, what would the score be? Just to give you a sense of what happened to the weighting, right? So for example, sustainable revenue growth, if you look at everybody's vote, 10 people voted at least 1 point on that. And the weighted average for those 10 was 3.73. 2 people put 10 or more points on those. So,
Okay.
so it was really important to them, right?
Yeah.
But if you sort of move them out, the rest of the 8, 2.27. So it just gives you a sense of how much was put there. So that's all the yellow does. And it's true for all the highlighted ones. But regardless of what you do there, you can see sustainable revenue growth, capital spending was also a big priority for most members of the committee, 10 votes, right? And weighted average of 2.3. And then outreach, again, high priority, 10 votes, but slightly less than capital spend, right? And so you can kind of see why those 3 were on the right-hand side, because they then touch on many of these town-wide specific, more specific initiatives, if you will. And I won't read them all, but you can kind of see, again, ranked roughly by how many people voted for them and thought they were important enough, and then what the weighted average was. Does that kind of make sense? Right? So that's how that shaped up. And then you could see, 4 is 25% of the committee. Then there were a couple others that kind of tailed off. Right? You got union contracts, 3 people, not a lot of votes on it. Housing development was something that was added, Peggy, by somebody, if I remember correctly. And again, you could see 2 and 1. So 2 people voted yes. 1 person really cared about it. The other person nominal. So kind of put that to the side. You can see the guidelines process, zoning changes, and improve the annual report. As I thought about how to incorporate some of this feedback, thought was, well, we can improve the annual report. Doesn't mean just because it got a low score, doesn't necessarily mean we should ignore it. But we can probably bake that into whatever work product that we do for the annual report. So which is why I kind of clustered them into saying, hey, we're probably going to be focusing on some of these topics in other places so we can incorporate this feedback and what we want to do in those other areas. Does that make sense? That's that first group there. That's kind of how I thought about it. Like the union contracts, for example, we're not going to get updates because it's under executive privilege, those discussions. We shouldn't get them. However, perhaps what we can do is in the annual report, we say, hey, if the costs go up 2% or 3% or 4%, here's the impact on taxes, right? There are ways to.
You'll know by then.
Sorry?
You'll know by then.
Okay, well, there you go, right? So there are other ways to go about doing that. Same thing on the housing development, the revenue opportunities. That housing development might probably fall under sustainable revenue growth, for example, right? For the guideline process, same thing I talked about earlier on the report. And then the zoning changes, we've already talked about the overlay district 2229. And again, the sustainable revenue growth probably falls into that as well. So that I kind of grouped those there. Does that was I clear in terms of why I grouped it that way before I get to a question?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Carlin.
Did you have any thought about adding a column that says, is there a warrant article associated with this piece?
No.
Because we're going to be asked our financial opinion about various warrant articles, and some will cover, some we won't.
Yep. Didn't think about it. And then others I couldn't quite categorize. You could see not a lot of folks benefit spending town. I think, Gail, you guys are trying to separate working with the schools, what benefits are going for school employees and town employees, right? I don't know if that's going to be done or not, but. And then Don, you had this idea of incorporating internal rate of revenue.
Internal rate of return, and it just really piggybacking on Chris's thoughts about sustainability.
Right. So whether we can do that or not, I don't know, which is why I put others.
Yep.
Right, and then sustainability got 3 votes, but not a whole lot of passion about it. And then the wastewater treatment, Peggy, to your point, we have 1 vote, not a whole lot of passion.
It's not wastewater, stormwater. Stormwater would be a brand new.
Who did the wastewater treatment? Was that?
Because it was mentioned in the most recent Public Works Commission meeting
Okay,
that they're gonna have to be coming to the town for a warrant article to do some upgrades / maintenance
Okay.
of their existing wastewater treatment plant.
Yep. so,
And it was gonna be millions of dollars over several years.
so what?
But that will be funded by the ratepayers
Right,
that are already
And
in the
that's-
sewer. The stormwater has, there's no identification of who those ratepayers are.
That's true.
Yeah. And who it's applicable.
yeah, no, that's good. So hold that
Let's
thought.
wait.
Carmen has,
That was fine.
okay,
And that in Gail's budget, I mean, was a huge number.
so does that come in though under the capital plan, capital planning? Wouldn't
It's
that
in
be
the
capital
capital
planning?
plan, but it doesn't,
It is, but
and
it's in
it's
the.
identified
enterprise
as
funds, right?
an enterprise fund, but
Stormwater is in the
I
enterprise.
don't know
fund?
who's in the enterprise. Right?
So are you in the process of making a decision of like? so-
There's feasibility study money it all just came up this year. You have to do the
Yeah.
feasibility, hire someone to look
No, no,
at
let's
how to
back up from
create
it.
it.
Where would the money come from though?
There's money there was money approved in the capital plan for a feasibility study.
But ultimately,
There's money in the capital plan to do the study to determine how to
much is
create such an
don't know
enterprise
yet.
fund. We don't.
to
we have
create an, so the
we
thought
don't-
process though is to create
feasibility
an
study.
enterprise fund. Okay, so
Yeah.
we're not envisioning it necessarily coming out of
We have to do the
Tax rates.
feasibility study, but no, it would be conceptually an enterprise fund, but you have to do the feasibility study to
Yeah.
look at what it would be created, how it gets funded. We haven't taken step one yet. We're still on the platform.
Okay.
Well, it identifies a new stormwater fund, running 1
Those are
1.5
estimates to sort of put
million,
placeholders in
per
there, so
year.
we don't. That's part of doing the 10-year plan is you sort of put placeholders to say, until we get more information, let's plop up.
So would that be included in other existing areas of focus like capital plan, or do we want to call it out as a special topic? I mean, I personally think it's too early to
Too
call it
early.
out right now. That's my
Wait for
opinion.
that step to.
Yeah.
Had, right? I mean. You can't do
General
much for that.
consensus?
I think regular reports from Gail is
Okay. So
fine.
I guess, other comments, thoughts on any of this? Because if not, we can kind of finalize and then start.
Something that wasn't product was the Peabody School as a revenue possibility. Is that worth discussing or thinking
So,
about?
well, so in my mind, I've developed, and I'm sure others have also, a list of potential revenue opportunities like pilots. I know Carrie's thinking about that. Peabody School could be, so in my mind, that gets into sustainable revenue growth. And we encourage both the town and the schools and other folks to come up with ideas for sustainable revenue growth as a organic part of kind of what we do is the way I was thinking about doing it. So if we've got a list, the next step is if we agree with this, I would say the next step is let's, as a finance committee, put our brains together and develop whatever lists. And then try to figure out what the best place is to go.
Yeah.
With those lists and ideas and drive some of the discussions and brainstorming. Does that, Carlin, help answer your question?
I think that I think it's our role to urge sustainable revenue growth. I think identifying the means and methods would be more up to the select board,
Identifying what?
more up to the select board,
Means and methods.
the location,
Absolutely. but-
urging change of zoning or something like that is, I think, a little moving out of our scope line, but I have typically taken a narrow view of our scope compared to other people, so.
Yeah, I don't, white boundaries, sometimes I ignore those. If
I
you've
know.
got an idea, you put it forward. They can either ignore us or they can take us up on it, is my attitude.
So I think this is good. I think the challenge will be, what do you really want to get done, right? So the time that we have to do this kind of work, remember, it's in addition to the required work that we have to do around guidelines and hearings and all that, and that becomes absorbed. Once you hit the fall, it becomes hard to do that. So the real question is, what do you really want to achieve in these things, right? So if the capital planning process is in kind of in motion, right? They're trying to figure out what they want to do on the town side. I'm not sure about the
Yep.
schools. I think we just need to set realistic goals about what we can get done this year, but I think these are good. These will be priorities for us for the next 3 years, right? So it's just a question of what do you want to get done this
So
year?
I tried to put down deliverables and objectives. I didn't get a lot of pushback that they were unrealistic. They're relatively general. And I kind of view this as a living, breathing document, right? It doesn't necessarily mean we can't change them, et cetera. And so, for example, just take the first one, encourage. So we could write a letter that says, we encourage you to do this without any ideas. Well, okay, that's one thing. But then we could also follow that up with, here's a list of 7 things that we thought of.
Yeah.
Right? And write that and say, okay, we'll see what then follow the progress.
Yep.
Which is why June 23rd, 2023 to May 24th. So.
Or set a target.
Well, absolutely, right? So
That's
that's why I think if folks are comfortable with this as a concept, what I would recommend is folks think a little bit more about these and let's either flesh out, get more specific, or maybe more general on these deliverables and objectives so that they're realistic, time bound, right? And we can look back and say, did we do this or not?
Good.
So is that going to be a topic for next month's discussion or our
So,
next
so
meeting?
what I'm gonna ask folks is, okay, people provided input and that's great. If we don't receive additional input, on these deliverables and objectives, these will be it. And then we'll use these as guideposts to make decisions and take some actions over the course of the next year at appropriate times in the processes. Right? This is a part of this is organic too. Any other, or people just too tired to think about this? Okay, so I see.
It's a good list.
Good list.
I feel as though some of this will simply inform some of our liaisons, some of our normal course of work, and also Peggy will expand on our advisory role to the town. And for example, I was thinking that FinCom could have a position on the potential zoning change, because it could lead to additional revenue that would help us with our schools, et cetera. So to be able to provide that perspective to voters who aren't thinking about that aspect of it would be within our advisory role.
Good. So no further questions. I will formally write this up. We'll take the word draft out of it and then ask for input on the specific deliverables by a certain time. And then we'll have a quick review and discussion in July. Okay. All right. So next item. Updated calendar. So I circulated an updated calendar. Alexa, we're on for July 20th, right? We're on for July 20th. At the school administration building, so as they've got a meeting before that. We'll hear from the schools around their process, et cetera. And then we'll move forward from there. That won't be probably the only meeting we'll have jointly with the school committee. We'll figure out ways to have some others through the process as well.
And then on the 13th, we have a regular meeting. Is that?
That's a
what it is?
TBD, and I'm gonna look,
TBD.
it's a TBD based on whether we need to do any transfers. So what we can do there is draw 8 short straws.
Sorry. I like the idea.
All right, approve the meeting minutes. Yeah, we wanna,
So within the packet, there are two, so we'll need to do this a couple of ways. So there are regular meeting minutes. There are 3 sets, and then there are the 2 sets from the Communications Task Force Committee. Right, so the members of that committee will need to vote on their 2, and then the full committee on the 3 sets of minutes
okay,
that
so
are in.
let's just go through them in order. What's the first one? Public hearing, March 15th.
A question on those minutes. So it says, I don't know which, yeah, it's a public hearing one. It says on Article 31 that Peggy and Kathy did not vote. Is that right? Or were they abstaining? Just strange to say that members didn't vote. Maybe it happened.
Oh,
The
I
BD
don't
Center.
31
I
was
don't know what it
BD.
was. Yeah, it wasn't
Maybe-
something controversial that I recall. Do you know? Dee, what
well,
happened?
in lack of their voting, it should be abstained. It's just that maybe the person who was writing the minutes didn't know that,
Yeah, I don't know.
because I agree with you.
It
It
sa-
just
sounds
sounded,
odd,
yeah,
right?
2 people didn't vote.
People didn't vote, but they were at the
But
meeting.
yes, so I think it should say 2 people abstained.
Are you saying it sounds odd they abstained, or no, you think it's incorrect? They did vote.
Well,
what-
they're
what-
here. I'm going to ask them.
Right, yeah. I think that's what you're saying, right? It's-
I don't know what
Did you,
happened, but
did
we
you
don't
vote on
usually-
31 is
We
her
don't
point?
usually have a situation where a member doesn't vote.
Yeah.
So.
Do you guys remember?
What was
What
31?
were you doing on the night of March 15th?
And we have a.
Yes.
I assume, with these raised minutes, I mean, I assume he watched the video.
So let's do this. So let's,
Yeah.
can we just have Lori?
No, this would have been Lois and Ray.
No, I know, but who's our new minute keeper? What's her? I forget her. name.
It's Lori, but she did not do.
I understand.
Fine.
Can we just ask Lori to go back to that section of the public hearing and see whether Kathy and Peggy abstained or whether they went to the restroom or whatever they
Yeah,
did.
it's March 15th,
Right.
Article 31.
We were both remote, right?
Yeah.
That's the one where you had, it's a lot difficult.
Yeah.
So.
No, but this item wasn't yes, you're right, but
Yeah.
this item was
Kathy, you were sitting
a
right there.
simple one, really.
You're sitting right
Right.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
true.
Pete was coming in.
So she,
Maybe.
So if we can just ask her to go to the video on that and correct it.
Correct it or
Okay.
whatever. It's just.
So let's go to the March.
I have a
Oh.
one on March 15, page 39. Line 4,
Which March 15th one, the regular or the,
On page 39.
I don't have
Page-
page.
Oh, the a
I
PDF
need
page.
which meeting are you?
I've got it. It's the second one.
All right, then. Okay. If someone wants to send them, I just need to know which
Yeah, yeah.
meeting.
It's
Oh, all right.
Like which meeting. are
I
you
don't.
in?
I
it's
don't have that in
March
front of me.
15th
So,
at page 3.
What days?
Well, keep going.
it was 39 on the,
PDF. Keep going.
okay. There's another one, Article 17, I have page 5. That doesn't make any sense. It was the CPS budget. What's the next?
That's not this 15th.
All right, do you have a page 5 on another?
What do we do? What we didn't do?
It was Article 17 on the CPS budget.
What's the specific point though? Maybe.
It said D. Ortner talked about public safety. It was on Article 17.
Yep.
And it was page 5 of
Yes,
those
I'm
minutes.
looking at it. Yep.
And it said that I talked about public safety and whatever, but it should say prior to that, it should say the first thing I did talk about was overhead and benefit costs, comma, and then it had the other two things.
Okay.
But I think that's important because
Oh, that's
that's
fine.
Article
That's
17
fine.
in the,
Sure, that's fine. So where it says public services. Before that. puts
Yes,
on
before
benefit
public
and,
services.
Benefits.
overhead and
Overhead
benefit costs.
Okay. Can I get a motion to approve that set of minutes with that amendment? Anybody? Going once? I can't do it. Somebody else has. I see two.
Motion to approve
All in favor?
as
Aye.
amended, as amended.
Yes, as amended.
Okay.
Aye. Every passes. Okay, so let's go to finance meeting April 30th. Any questions or
Is this a
comments there?
subcommittee or is that?
No, this is the full
Regular,
committee,
regular.
April 30th. This is the one that we held at the, in the room with the door open.
Yeah, right.
Uh,
Yep, no, it's fine.
Any comments? No, we were not.
No
hiding.
one was hiding.
And no comments. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
There we go. All right, let's keep going, guys. Okay, now we're talking the task force, June 1.
Okay, on that one, on the June 1, at the end of the page, it has meeting ended at 4:45. It was 3:45.
Okay. Who wrote those minutes, Steve? Okay, can I get a motion to approve those minutes as amended?
Task force minutes of June 1st as amended.
You have to second it.
Second,
All in favor? Aye. Okay. And then the June 5th task force. Any questions, comments, concerns? Can I get a motion?
Motion to approve the meeting minutes of the finance committee task force of June 5th.
Second.
All in favor?
aye.
Okay.
Are we all voting?
No,
on
the
those?
only.
No, it should only be
We're
the
there.
sub.
Folks have voted on it. but
Task
yes,
force.
let's keep going.
Procedure.
No, I was.
If there's, it's.
We all voted,
less
the
than
three of us, the
quorum.
three of us voted.
I know, but it's less than a quorum. And I'm not sure you need minutes. That's all. That's just a point of procedure. You know, it's less than a quorum. You don't need to.
Oh, it was an
You don't
official
need to-
task force.
They posted.
You don't need to do
It's
it.
9:25. Let's keep
great.
going.
It's great practice. It's great, but
Yes.
So, Patricia, I'm not clear. Do we all need to vote on that? Or was
No.
it just? the board of the-
Just the people that, just the folks that
That's why I
were.
was asking. the question.
Task force had to vote? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
the three of us voted. We're good. Lois is not there. Let's keep going.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Correspondence.
None.
No correspondence. We did receive one at the late hour. We will forward that and include it in next meetings.
It'll be,
Packet.
it'll go in the July 20th.
the July
packet
20th
because
packet.
It pertains to the July 20th.
But we'll forward it beforehand for you guys, but it'll be officially in the packet. Okay?
It'll
Sorry?
go,
You're gonna get the letter. We already talked about it. It's the paving issue.
It's the paving issue.
Yeah. Okay?
it'll be part of the packet
Yeah.
because we don't,
We'll forward it to fit folks here. Can we not
Okay,
do
that's
that?
a different process than we were doing with.
Oh, we were
correspondence.
just gonna include it in the packet? Fair enough. We'll just include it in the packet. Okay?
That's fine.
Review follow-up items. Gail, what follow-up items have you been keeping track of?
Got paste this in. We're gonna add the task list to the packet going forward. We're gonna look into whether or not we can add an insert to the tax bill or the utility tax bill. D is gonna collect a list of what groups the members want to participate in for the outreach
Yeah.
program. Parsha is going to send the definition of whether you're a liaison or. And Parsha is going to circulate the goals and objectives to solicit additional input for the next.
Anybody have any other items we need to follow up on?
When are we gonna know about the 13th?
That we will know. I would have to, I think there's a July 10th select board meeting, so I would need to go to the select board before the finance committee, so you will know the week before. We need, this is dependent on if we need to do any transfers until sort of the dust settles a little bit,
What meeting are we talking about?
the July 13th.
The July 13th.
That is, the sole purpose is to approve any budget transfers that we would need to go to the select board
Gotcha.
and then to the finance.
Oh, all
committee.
right.
Clerks have to be there at that meeting.
All right.
Okay.
Those who vote yes get to go to the meeting.
Do we have another meeting in July then? after
Oh,
that?
The July
27th?
20th
Yeah.
meeting, the 20th.
The 20th.
We do still have-
27th is
We're gonna
gone. Okay.
Cancel the 27th. We shifted some of the agendas.
So that's the one in Ripley.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it gonna be at 7 or is it early?
Uh, 7. They're gonna provide pizza.
They meet earlier. so I
Yeah.
didn't know.
All right, that's it. Thank you guys for your pay. Oh, hold on.
I just want, I got the answer to your question about the percentage on the real estate transfer
Oh.
tax. It was presented at 2023 special town meeting. And the town reauthorized select board to submit petition for special legislation to allow us to do this. And they changed the numbers
Oh.
from the first time that the town authorized this petition for a home rule legislation. So the proposal as it was adopted by town meeting was for a 1% real estate transfer fee on a buyer for the portion of the purchase price above $1 million.
Yeah.
And that was a change. Previously, it had been 1% for the portion of a purchase price above $600,000.
Okay, so it's a real estate transaction surtax, not a real estate tax.
Right.
Okay, because at the breakfast meeting, I understood that to be on real estate. Is what, okay.
Transfer tax. And the model for this is
Okay.
the Dukes County, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard have been doing this for land bank for years. And so there's on every property transaction, there's a little fee that gets paid. And it goes to land bank and they've done amazing conservation.
And that's
Thank you.
just FYI, that's interesting. So they pushed from 600 to 1 million, which corresponds to the median home price.
So any public comment? I don't see any, and that's good. And I think we're adjourned. Thank you.